So starting out with April, we had the Pixel Wars release campaign. This was basically just the original April Fool's event for this. It was actually a pretty fun one for those of us that got to play it on JP. But besides that, there's really nothing too much to talk about with that. And then we roll right into Sea Monster Crisis. Sea Monster Crisis is going to be a fairly important event story-wise. It's not like Tunguska or anything like that. But from everything I've ever heard about this event is it has decent implications. But again, you guys can see it does have that LB2 requirement. So you are going to see where they're kind of up in the bar with requirements to get you guys to do the actual Lost Belts to catch up on story. So please understand that. And they do give you the warning that this event will include spoilers for Avalon LaFay. I don't remember them actually being that big of a spoiler, but I can talk to someone to make sure. Still, at the end of the day, please understand that getting the story done is always to your benefit. So let's go ahead and talk about the actual banners here. We do have two for this one. The first one is going to be the Trung Sisters and Mysterious Alter Ego Lambda, aka Melt Lancer. The Trung Sisters are a very interesting unit. We talked about Dioscuri earlier, and how Dioscuri is this sort of like challenge unit that has the ability to gain some real power through their cards and getting back to another NP. They also have Invuln Pierce on NP, and that really just means that they can't be stopped. If Dioscuri is somewhat this unstoppable juggernaut of a challenge unit, the Trung Sisters are like this defensive juggernaut of a, challenge unit. So taking a look at their kit here, you can see they are art single target, but they basically end up having party-wide attack for 3 turns, arts up for the party for 3 turns. So it's not just themselves, this is also going to be helping the supports, the other damage dealer that may be alongside them, get to the NP, deal more damage with the NP, you name it. So a definite nice effect on everybody's performance right there. Their second skill ends up being Arts and Buster performance of 3 turns, basically a 15% each. And then the ability to grant on-self attack buffs for 3 turns that increase Buster performance by 10% when attacking with Arts cards, and Arts performance by 10% when attacking with Buster cards. So basically, for each card you use, the other card type ends up getting a buff when you use it. So definitely nice, because it just means that they're in this feedback loop where the more you use their own cards, the better they're going to get. Obviously, the singular quick card is not going to be as desirable then because of that, but still a really nice unit. And then, again, you get the NP gauge here of 30%, allowing them to just kind of have a little bit more brute force there. Increase the party's NP gen by 20% on top of that arts up that they already gave. So really helping out people's ability to get to an NP. And then critical attack chance resistance for 3 turns by 20%. So basically just lowering the chance that a crit lands on any unit in your party by 20%, which is a strong value at that point. So again, really, really nice kit right there, but that's not everything, because they end up with an NP that deals damage to one enemy and then heals the party by 1,000 every turn for 3 turns. You can stack these up, especially if you're looping the Trung Sisters, as you can see they get a 9-hit NP. So they actually can be very strong in the right set of circumstances. I've had sort of unique fights where I basically didn't care about using the Trung Sisters, and then other fights where they were just incredibly strong to use. So again, I highly recommend at least looking at them and considering them just due to that supportive capability, because you can see their overcharge effect that is stackable at 3 turns also increases party arts and buster performance by 10% on top of that. So everybody in the party just keeps getting stronger and stronger due to everything the Trung Sisters are doing, and that is one of the real reasons that they are just solid. In fact, pairing them with double Castoria allows them to kind of handle that one thing that Castoria doesn't do: heal. So it really allows you to just sit there and stall out and just kind of, keep looping the Trung Sisters NP and just keep nibbling away at the enemy until they can actually finish the job before the enemy can ever really get through and do anything to your party. So again, I highly recommend them, at least from a challenge standpoint. Lambda, as you guys know, is a very popular unit. She is AoE arts. We mentioned her before with the with the AoE Lancers that we were talking about. The problem that they kind of have at this point is buffing any of the 4 stars, because it'll start to challenge the 5 stars again. They certainly can do it, and I expect that at some point they will. Whether or not they do it for a unit like Melt Lancer will remain to be seen, because again, I think a lot of people look at Melt Lancer on paper and they see kind of the amount of damage that she deals with her 3rd skill activated, which her 3rd skill is a 1-turn attack buff of 50%. With that buff, her damage is respectable. Without that buff, especially at low MP levels, Melt Lancer's damage can really suffer. If you have MP 5 of her, certainly that helps soften that blow. But there are numerous times where you'll just be up against a node that just has way too much health for Melt Lancer to really handle. That being said, you're talking about like 90++ content, or even a very robust 90+ node. So it's not the hugest of concerns. It just may make you a little bit more inconsistent in how you handle it. The good news is Melt ends up having some really nice stuff in her kit, particularly the arts up of 5 turns. So again, even if you go longer than 3 turns, it's not the end of the world. The real problem would be that you'd probably end up losing like Castoria buffs and such with her. But she does end up trading that relative lack of damage for some excellent, some stellar refund. And that, I think, absolutely works to her favor, as it just allows you to kind of delay a lot of her steroids that you would be buffing her with until later turns where she actually needs it. Again, she does have the ability that ignores defense, and she can remove evasion buffs on waterside battlefield, but that's really not that big of a deal for most things. So I do think she is a very capable unit, and as an arts AoE Lancer, she can be somewhat your go-to. Just be careful of, like I said, that damage component. But this will be basically her first raid up in a long time. This will be a solo raid up, so you do have that going for you in that regard. We do have some interesting CEs here, but Goddess of the Netherworld is going to be the one that we're going to focus on. It's split stats. It does give NP damage up of 15%, NP gen of 15%, and then NP gauge of 5% every turn. This would actually be a stellar CE if it were all attack scaling, because it would just be excellent for challenge combat. You would have automated charge per turn, increasing the NP gain when you're using your cards, and then increasing the amount of damage you do with your NP is fantastic. So that's maybe the only downside, is that this is not a all attack scaling CE. Again, though, nothing too much to write home about the other CEs in this event, so it is what it is. Then we get to the second summoning campaign, and this is going to be the return of Morgan Le Fay. I've had a lot of people ask me when her next banner is. It's going to be here sometime in April, basically, for NA. We can maybe expect this a little sooner, but that's only if NA is operating on an accelerated schedule. As of right now, as of the recording this video, we're 2 days ahead of where JP was already, but I'm not expecting that they really need to move too much around for the middle part of the year. So don't expect this to come like, a week early or anything like that. I think as of this point in time, it just kind of looks like we'll stay maybe a couple days ahead, and that's really it. But at the end of the day, I may be wrong about that, so we'll see. Just stay tuned as you start getting closer to this actual event. Again, though, I'm going to say Morgan Le Fay is still holding up very well over time. There's going to be a lot of talk about, obviously Arjuna Alter with his return during the Chaldea Boys event. And there's going to be a lot of talk of Ibuki Summer with her coming out in the summer event this year as to who is a good AoE Berserker nowadays. Morgan Le Fay still holds up extremely well over time, and the reason for this is, multiple at this point. It's not only the fact that she is a 50% charger, but the fact that she does nice things for the party. And again, she does have a gut skill that can basically secure her crits due to the fact that she has 5,000% absorption. Add in the fact that her NP gives overcharge for one stage, one time for 3 turns, and you have this really nice synergy, both with other units alongside her needing to deal damage, and with support units needing to reach a higher overcharge rank on their NP. This is what allows her to be really a staple of a lot of invincible comps that we like to run, and it really just allows her to be a really sort of excellent unit for both farming and challenge purposes. The real issues are going to come when nobody is in her Roundtable Night Fae or man niches, as again, this is just kind of what she does exceedingly well, is get that extra damage and firepower for both the party and herself. But if nothing is in her niche, then you have to be very careful that she's not going to deal a lot of damage at lower NP levels. So she can't solve every node for you in that regard, but she is excellent for a lot of the nodes that have existed at this point in the game. So yes, I still highly recommend Morgan Le Fay. She is still very good to this point on JP. Wu is definitely an interesting one as a single target assassin. She has gotten a ton of buffs. I think at some point someone over in Lasengle's headquarters just absolutely favors her, because it's pretty much at this point to the detriment of all other single target 4-stars, as there's just a ton of people that have not really gotten as much love as Wu. Wu has always had a leg up due to the Imperial privilege that she has, basically giving her, again, some really nice attack power. But they've even come back and buffed this to give party charge. They buffed her first skill to end up giving her buff block status. And really, her third skill has always been decently strong with party attack and quick up. And her NP values are just stellar, given the fact that she already has an NP interlude and now removes buffs with it. So definitely, she is a strong unit, especially for a 4-star. She often ends up rivaling the 5-stars in terms of damage. The big issue is going to be consistency, because she doesn't really have charge in her kit other than that 10%. And as a result, you're going to have to rely on card RNG and basically RNG with her Imperial privilege to determine her performance and ability to get back to other NPs and hit hard with them. So again, I do think she's a very solid unit, but certainly not a gotta have for anyone. Just a really good, I'd say, backup single target assassin, or maybe your go-to if you don't have an excellent 5-star. Real quick here, let me go back in here and take a look at the strengthening campaign. Yeah, this is where Wu got the Imperial privilege buff. So I was sitting there, I saw that right as I was clicking out. It's like, I had the strange feeling that that was it. But again, from here, we end up in a little bit more stall. You get another advanced quest and basically the Learning with Manga Pre-release campaign. There is a summoning campaign here, and this one ends up having quite a bit of units. So just talking about this here, understand that this is going to be prior to the Super Bunyan event, as we like to call it, our Golden Week collab that'll be happening this year on NA. And essentially, this is going to be the return of several rarer units, particularly of the summer variety. So to start off with, let's go ahead and talk about Tamamo Lancer. Now, I know some people feel like Tamamo Lancer's performance is actually pretty stellar. I, on the other hand, have felt like Tamamo Lancer's performance has really struggled over the years. It's not that you couldn't have a strong Tamamo Lancer and make her perform well. The issue is just that you were making her perform well in spite of her flaws. So that being said, she still needs the flaws adjusted. She has gotten at least one upgrade, which fixed the Goddess Metamorphosis skill to basically remove the stupid ass stun that used to be on it and give her charge in recompense of 30%. This now allows her to be able to be brute forced into being able to 3-turn, also just allows her to get to her NP quicker, so it definitely helps out with at least some of the biggest issues that she was facing. Still though, the damage leaves a little bit to be desired, particularly on the NP front, as we do actually have welfares that rival her, and really, she ends up being last amongst the single target SSR Lancers at this point, because she is the only one of them that doesn't have her NP interlude still. I don't know why they haven't given it to her, and I'm kind of mad on her behalf in that stance, because they absolutely need to give it to her at this point to allow her to compete with the likes of Enkidu, Brynhilde, Shisho, you name it. So I absolutely think that they do need to pay a little bit more attention to Tamamo, but she is a much more serviceable unit now after that buff. So I think you guys can look forward to that, as she will not be this dud that you have to be like, oh my god, I'm so angry that I got her on a GSSR or something like that. Again, I don't think she was ever that bad even to begin with, but certainly I think she was not as much of a priority for people that were not the biggest of Tamamo fans. That being said, for you Tamamo fans, She is absolutely infinitely more usable now, and for you non-Tamamo fans, she is not nearly as bad as she used to be. So I think in that regard, she is absolutely in a better spot, and you guys can consider rolling for her at this point. Astolfo Saber is another interesting one, I'd say. Basically, Astolfo Saber started out wildly different from Okita as a single target quick saber. But over time, due to the buffs that both of them have gotten, they've begun to converge and become very samey as to how they work. The thing is, I'm always going to end up giving that preference to Okita, not because she's a saber face and I like saber faces, but rather because I find that Okita's card performance just absolutely outperforms Astolfo's, and a large part of this is due to the fact that basically Okita just has always had stellar card performance amongst sabers. Even then, if we look at Astolfo, I have to really still wonder why the third skill works the way that it does and why it basically absorbs, or why it basically increased the critical star absorption of Buster cards for 3 turns when Astolfo only has the singular Buster card. It just feels like an utter waste of the itemization of this skill. I understand that that's kind of what they're going for, is trying to make that Buster card hit hard, but this is going to be a unit that's predominantly buffed by quick units, so at the end of the day, it's not really until Summer Scotty comes around basically helping out Buster cards for quick servants that this skill really comes into its own as any sort of usefulness in that regard. Otherwise, I think it just was this sort of gotcha mechanic where you go like, okay, I've got my Buster card now, time to, you know, try and crit with it. Otherwise, it just ended up being a really weird choice, and I think they would have done better, you know, changing the effect to something else. Still, he has the ability to remove his own debuffs. That also has gotten buffed to give him 20% charge and crit stars. And again, he still kind of keeps his evaporation of sanity type skill from his Rider form. So I do think that Astolfo Saber is certainly a good unit, but still clunky somewhat in how he works. That being said, given the fact that he can NP seal, that's always going to have its uses for being able to stall out an enemy. Not necessarily draining, but at least being able to prevent the enemy from NPing you temporarily. And Astolfo Saber will get stronger in a loop due to the fact of his overcharge. So again, I do think Astolfo Saber has something to look forward to with Summer Scotty, but certainly still has some clunkiness to how he functions. DVR, as we like to call her, aka Vinci Rider. Don't be confused with the Ruler variant that could also be called DVR. But basically, Vinci Rider is still to this point an excellent unit to have. Obviously, we have comparisons where we talked about like Odysseus earlier on. We'll be talking about the Hekenden event later on as well with Bakin. And certainly there's Habitrot out there as an AoE arts rider, and even someone like Surfmo. What makes Vinci Rider stand out amongst all of those is the fact of how automatable she is. She gets the 20% charge per turn, she gets debuff immunity for 3 turns, and still on top of all of that, ends up giving the entire party 20% charge after her NP goes off. So this means you consume the NP gauge to use it and deal the damage, and then right after you get 20% back based right off of that. Her NP is only 3 hits, so it doesn't generate a whole lot of NP gauge, but given the automated 20% charge per turn and then automated 20% charge per turn, you've got just 40% of her bar covered every single turn. This makes her very loopable and very good. But I think a lot of people overlook this and don't realize that this is good for another reason. It's party charge. This means you're getting your Castorias, your Tamamos, anyone supporting her to their NP. This means you're getting another damage dealer that may be there to handle a single enemy wave to their NP. This is a very strong effect, and it allows you to either reduce or potentially even run without certain supports in order to be able to pop off with her. And for that reason alone, even though her damage is not the best, I have to admit that using DVR is just very brainless most of the time and fun. And that's one of the reasons I think having her is always a good idea. She is excellent as both a damage dealing looper and a support, and you can operate her within the bounds of like Black Grail and stuff like that. So handling the damage is pretty easy to be able to do, and as a result, I do think that she is worthy of your attention. That being said, allow me to issue a warning. At NP1, the damage will be still somewhat suspect, so getting NP2 can absolutely help her out in that regard, but it is not a requirement by any means, certainly for more free-to-play oriented players. Then we get to Da Vinci Caster, and unlike her Rider counterpart, Da Vinci Caster ends up in an interesting spot as well. She has basically her triple arts deck, and she has gotten some love over time. She is arguably our hardest hitting AoE caster at this moment, but we definitely have some contenders for that crown. The biggest issue with Da Vinci Caster is that her refund is pretty crap given the fact that she only has a one-hit NP. The good news for Da Vinci Caster is she's got a 50% charge skill, so we can brute force this if we have to. Again, though, we do see that she ends up having the basic NP charge per turn, every single turn of 10%. Not quite the 20% that the Rider has, so not nearly as much of this is automated, but she has gotten some upgrades that have given her the 3-turn party arts up of 20%. That not only helps out the refund, it also helps out the damage. And again, we also see that she basically ends up having Natural Born Genius, that kind of worked just like Tesla's, where it was good, but it was always RNG. And then they just come right back around and say, hey, you know what? What if we just increase the amount of NP damage here to 3 turns, basically, and then allow her to have it be targetable to grant overcharge as well. So this now works as functionally something that was RNG to fully complete, where it will proc every time, and it's targetable, and it gives additional effects, and it lasts longer. This is just a crazy buff when it happened at the time, and it's really strong for her. Definitely helps Da Vinci Caster hold her own down the stretch. She may not be your go-to choice all the time, and she is a very rare unit, so with regards to that, rolling her here wouldn't be the worst of ideas, but I do think that, again, she can be very strong for you, and it's just up to you to determine whether or not you have to have her by any means. Again, her NP ignores defense and basically reduces critical attack chance, so odds are you're not going to get hit too hard, and she does have an NP damage scaling overcharge that can work with Oberon. So, at the end of the day, I do think she's very solid still to this point. Blavatsky Archer is an interesting one, and interestingly enough, with Oberon and double Castoria, you can Black Grail loop with her. It's not pretty, but it can be done. I think the biggest issue that I have with Blavatsky Archer overall over time is that the damage performance is just not there, and I attribute a lot of this to the simple fact that Nyarf is a just terrible skill. Absolutely terrible. It adds a flat amount to 5 attacks. That's it. It's not nearly going to be as good as something like a Charisma or an Arts Up that would have scaled percentage-wise. It's just a small, flat amount. And I think that is ultimately what holds her back. So Blavatsky Archer definitely needs an upgrade. She does have the 20% charge for the party like her caster counterpart, but she doesn't have that tricolor buff. She just has Arts Up for 1 turn. This is also something that could stand a buff. They could extend this to 3 turns, or maybe like 3 times 3 turns, because it is a 40% buff, but yeah, she definitely has some oddities in her kit for kind of how she works. Did get that NP interlude though, it did help. It does have an overcharge effect that charges the party's gauge by 10% after the fact, kind of giving her not only more refund for herself, but also a little bit more capability to actually support the party, kind of like her caster counterpart. So again, I do think she's had some good upgrades and it has helped out her usability, but at the end of the day, it's up to you to determine whether or not you want to invest too hard in her, and I'll leave that up to you. And Bonny and Mary Reed Archer are also another interesting case. Like their Rider counterpart, they are 1 HP memers. Unlike their Rider counterpart, their damage was a lot lower. Thankfully, though, they had the upgrade that their Rider counterpart didn't for years. which is the fact that they always had the capability of having guts. That worked to their favor, given how their NP ends up working. So again, not going to read this whole thing to you. I'm just going to point out that the less health they have, the more damage they do. So having them at 1 HP is optimal. So giving them a guts skill that had 1 HP was a smart move for them. Does mean that you could use them with Qin Gong in order to kind of gong themselves, we like to say, where you'll basically try to kill them off, but they'll pop back up with the guts at 1 HP, and then they will do a stellar amount of damage with that. Still, their damage was, at least for a long period in time, a little bit lackluster, if not for that, so that was kind of the issue. And so, as a result, the devs come back in and they end up buffing the treasure hunt skill to give them charge. So they now have 30% charge in their kit to allow them to be able to function a little bit better with some better CEs, maybe be able to function at a higher capacity to help out that damage. And I do think this is the weird thing that I've talked about, where more charge leads to more damage because of your ability to end up getting them to an NP from a better standpoint. So again, this does make them pretty usable. You can brute force 3-turn them thanks to this, since it's on a 6-turn cooldown. So this now means that they work with double Koyanskaya Oberon, hilariously enough, if you wanted to, but it's up to you. They are a relatively rare unit. They are a year 1 summer unit, so they don't get too many banners, and especially with your 4 stars, this is something to consider. In that regard, same thing for Blavatsky. She was also somewhat of a rare unit. Same thing with Marie Caster here. Unfortunately, in Marie Caster's case, we have no upgrades. This is a year 1 unit, a summer unit that is rare, that has no upgrades, and Marie Caster desperately needs them. I do find Marie Caster to be a somewhat interesting unit for one reason and one reason alone. Yeah, she has the survivability for 3 attacks that helps her out, but the damage is not that good. Where I've used Marie Caster effectively is sort of in a 1-2-3 type of lineup, where I have 3 different units that each handle their own wave. And what I use Marie Caster for is for her charisma, because she can increase the star generation of male allies, basically kind of helping her out, or kind of helping people out. So then you combine that with the critical star generation, you're going to be swimming in stars if you have the right pairings. So where I've actually used her before is alongside Caster Gill, because Caster Gill also increases the amount of star generation for the party, and you can actually see as you can manage to crit down some waves, or maybe just have each of them handle a wave, and it does work pretty decent synergy-wise. Not the strongest thing in the world, but hey, it does help out. So again, she is somewhat of a rare unit. If you like Sup My Homies, the summer variant, feel free to go for her, because she's not going to get a lot of banners. And then we have OG Astolfo, as I like to call him. Astolfo is definitely in a, I'd say, more weird place at this point, but a lot of that's due to quick. That being said, Astolfo has always been this decent option, given the fact that, you know, a long time ago he got the 50% charge skill, and he's good from there. I remember still like arguing with people when Quick first came out over the fact that you can 3-turn loop Astolfo, and people didn't realize that. Because, and the big reason why is because Astolfo only has a single hit NP, and he is quick, which is not exactly known for its NP generation. So don't expect it. Astolfo's not going to get a lot of NP gen with his NP, but you can brute force him. Any 50% charge unit can be brute forced into a 3-turn. So that has always been to his advantage. Now with Oberon, this is even easier. So you can definitely use it to decent effect. And he has had an NP interlude that increases the amount of damage he deals and gives him even more stars. But I do think one of the interesting aspects, besides the fact that he ignores defense, is this self-evasion for 3 attacks. If you're looping him, obviously, you're just going to have this kind of rolling around, but this does add an element of somewhat survivability there in a bunch of quick comps that maybe don't have it. In that regard, I think that's something that they could have done for Scotty's NP interlude, would have been to make her dodge stackable with other sources of dodge, but that would have probably been smart and good of the devs, and they didn't think about that one. Still, I do think that this is relatively nice, especially if you can't manage to get to Scotty's NP, at helping keep Astolfo alive and keeping him from getting punished too hard. So I do think that Astolfo, still for a 4-star who's permanent, could definitely work out for you. He could be a very serviceable and decently hard-hitting AoE rider. So by all means, roll for him if you like the monster can meme, or ignore him entirely if you find it annoying. It's up to you. And just to give you an idea about the pairings here, you can see Blavatsky is paired with Tamamo Lancer. Astolfo is paired with, shockingly enough, Astolfo. Da Vinci is paired with the Yuri Pirates, and Da Vinci is paired with the Caster form of Marine. Law of the Jungle is, interestingly enough, on Raid Up. This is an old New Year's CE from 2015. Definitely has interesting art, but there's no reason you have to have it. Same thing with each of the other ones subsequently as they're here. Again, if you're here for collection's sake, go for it, try to collect them all, but there is absolutely no reason to have these. Again, it's just a flat QP amount. If you're maybe farming some like really small node that gave, you know, relatively nothing else, you could assure that you would at least get decent QP from it. But to say if you're that strapped for QP, you need to be running Treasure Vault. So it can be a little bit more additive on the end of a node, but I don't really recommend taking them. Okay, so that is the pre-campaign. We had the FGO Arcade Unite campaign. This is actually nothing. It was just the devs' excuse to give us 10 courts. Literally nothing else. And then we end up going into the Learning with Manga release commemoration campaign. We might get something like this, but I doubt it. And it really just was a craft essence for Bunyan, so nothing too much. Because a lot of it was meant to hype the actual manga collaboration, which is our Golden Week collab event this year. So, Learning with Manga is a really interesting event. It does have this sort of Pokemon-esque like digging mini game that you can use to farm additional fossils, aka resources, out of it. It is infinitely repeatable somewhat, but it is completely RNG, so you may not get the things that you want in great quantity. Kind of up to you to determine whether or not it's really worth your investment and to look at the resources to see. But it is one of those sort of like mini lotto type events. I'm gonna say it's not as good as the summer one that we had last year, but it is still a decent one depending on your viewpoint and the stuff that you need. Again, taking a look real quick here, you guys can see we do get the summoning campaign for Super Bunyan and Daikokuten. So talking about each of them in turn, Super Bunyan is a really, I'm gonna say at this point, probably overlooked unit, because Super Bunyan actually hits extremely hard for a single target alter ego. She is single target buster, and she ends up having charge in her kit to help her out. All of her cooldowns are pretty good in that regard, as again, you can see the 6-turn cooldowns, the 30% charge, the overcharge, and again, basically the critical star absorption of buster cards with NP seal for enemies. It's a really synergistic and nice kit, and it really does help Bunyan pop off. But I think a lot of people either just did not care for Bunyan's design or do not like Bunyan as a character. Again, I think Bunyan's pretty cute. I don't think she deserves the hate that she gets, but at the end of the day, she's got that triple buster gorilla deck, and she has a really synergistic kit, including her passive here. And what this passive does is it grants her light stacks, basically for 3 turns whenever she attacks, which enables extra damage on Super Bunyan's MP. It's going to end up being super effective damage, as you can see, as it ends up scaling with extra damage to enemies, basically by the number of stacks that you have. So you can get a lot of firepower, particularly if you're carding here, making Bunyan really good for challenge environment types of deals. And she does get the ability to further reduce defense for 3 turns by 10% on the back end. So hitting the same enemy over and over again, you're getting stronger, they're getting weaker, and you are just pummeling them harder and harder and harder with Bunyan. And that's one of the reasons why Bunyan is good. Again, at the end of the day, I have to just say that Bunyan's kit is incredibly offensive, and it really does work. Be careful about the survivability aspect, but hey, you know, take Merlin if you're that worried and just really like help her pop off. Daikokuten is an interesting one, as it's going to be yet another quick based caster. We don't often see many of these in FGO, and they've just started coming out as of the prior year on NA. Even to this date on JP, there have not been too many, and Daikokuten is a excellent one. I think a lot of people are probably weirded out by the fact that the rats are, well, rats. And so a lot of people probably will ignore Daikokuten due to either the art style or just not liking the design of the character. But what if I told you that Daikokuten was an AoE quick Black Grail looping caster? And then you start to really see the potential of these units. So not only do they have a litany of traits at their disposal with double quick cards and double arts cards to help their NP gen, they end up getting quick performance of 3 turns, critical stars every turn, recovering the party's HP by 1,000 every turn for 3 turns. So now they also have sustain for challenge environments. The ability to charge their own NP gauge by 30%, and then the ability to charge the party's NP gauge every turn for 3 turns by 10%. So now they have sustain for the support as well and helping them get to their NP. And then you have party evasion 1 attack 3 turns and party NP generate by 30%. And dear God, they're a one-stop shop for I will kill you and manage to live to fight another day. So Daikokuten ends up being a really good, like sneakily good 4-star. And it's kind of wild at how well they made Daikokuten. To me, this is a sign that they at least know some of the issues with Quick, because Daikokuten is absolutely designed to deal a lot of damage and still kind of address those issues and help keep the party alive. We haven't even gotten to the NP. The NP ends up reducing all enemies' quick resistance by 20% for 1 turn, meaning subsequent cards will deal more damage and generate more stars. And then increases the party's critical damage by 20% for 3 turns. On top of that, then deals super effective damage to enemies with the Earth attribute. And you start going like, holy crap, what don't they do? Well, they don't invuln pierce, they don't buff strip, they don't like... So there is some stuff that they don't do. But they have a very synergistic, very strong, very good for either farming or challenge-oriented kit. So in a weird way, even if you didn't like Bunyan, rolling Daikokuten does bring a lot of advantages. And it's up to you to determine whether or not you want to go for them. You certainly don't have to, but it is there. Your 5-star CE right here for the gacha is going to end up being Adventures in the Children Kingdom. It's all attack scaling. And hey, remember how I said the rats didn't have invincibility pierce? It will increase critical damage and NP generation rate by 20% on top of that. So yeah, it's a very good CE all around. Again, it's up to you to determine whether or not you wish to roll this banner. If you don't feel like you're missing out on this, there are several other CEs that can do similar stuff. But that is a very strong CE, especially in challenge environments. The rest of it, not too much to write home about. But there is a friend point campaign on top of this. Those of you guys that remember Nobukatsu in the prior year there, him being a 1-star FP-oriented welfare unit, you had to roll to get him, but he was available in the friend point gacha for the entire time of the event. Welcome to Mary Anning, who ends up being a 1-star unit that you will have to gacha for in the duration of the entire event. Prior to like last month on JP, we weren't sure whether or not Mary Anning, or when Mary Anning was going to get another banner, but she did get one, so now we know that this is not the only rate up for her. So you can rest assured that if you don't manage to get NP5 for here, that there will be other ones, but I highly recommend getting NP5, if for no other reason than she's actually kind of decent for a 1-star. Obviously, you can see she increases the attack of female or unknown gender allies for 3 turns, which in retrospect definitely was a hint at Yamato Takeru, because if you don't know anything about Mary Anning, you should understand that Mary Anning is a saber face simp. Mary Anning is the female personification of me. Basically, she simps for Saber the whole time, and as a result, you can see she does end up buffing them somewhat, giving arts an attack up. She gains critical stars basically up to 30, so it's a really nice bomb there on a 4-turn cooldown. Downside is she deals 500 damage to herself. Third skill ends up reducing all enemies' NP gauge by 1 and charging the party's NP gauge by 10%, while increasing the party's critical damage for 3 turns. So definitely really nice. Not too bad as far as the kit goes. You can maybe look at her as somewhat of a like lesser version of Melt Lancer in a weird way. And she actually does have decent refund numbers and can be looped. She deals damage to all enemies and she inflicts buff block to them for 1 time 3 turns. So Imagine looping over the enemies and buff blocking them with a 1-star, and it actually gets kind of hilarious. But still, like I said, as far as 1-stars go, the damage isn't going to be the most stellar thing, but she's actually quite serviceable for what she is. So, again, highly recommend getting her for no other reason than the fact that she is free. You have no excuse. Again, you do have the experience craft essences here. Just a brief TLDR on this. These are really good for craft essence bombs. If you don't know how to make craft essence bombs, please, please, please go look at my guide on them. I explain them in detail as to not only how to make them, but why to make them. They are extremely good and efficient at saving you QP while leveling a craft essence to 100. So I highly recommend watching it. These Cs are going to be perfect for stuff like that. And again, just do it. You'll thank yourself later. Okay, guys, so now we're going to be continuing on with the month of May here, and you guys can see we start out with the 25 million downloads campaign. This is going to absolutely be huge for NA. Not only is it going to be the return of Castoria, but you're also going to have an SR ticket here, and that alone will be worthy of a lot of people's attention, including, and I'm not going to review every single unit on this ticket, but including Hephaestion that has just come out and is a permanent unit. So you've got quite a laundry list of units here to choose from. It should be all available permanent and story locked units that are 4 stars, but not limited units. So just keep that in mind, that there is some relative restrictions there. You can get other stuff here, but it is what it is. There is a craft essence exchange ticket, basically. With regards to the limited missions and everything, it's just some more free courts. Again, we're going to get a Da Vinci Workshop update. This will be where you'll finally have the opportunity to be able to purchase Jalter's costume. So hip hip hurrah for everybody that's been waiting on that. And then certainly the return of free sailing will be available. And then again, yeah, if you've already purchased it before, it'll refund the thing. But this is also going to be where we're going to get blue apples. If you're unsure of what a blue apple is, you make it from bronze saplings. Basically, you'll get bronze saplings from completing story. So the more story you have done, the more bronze saplings you'll have. But what blue apples are is they're sort of like condensed resin from Genshin, where it allows you to sort of bank your AP. That is to say, if you like wake up in the morning and you gotta like rush off to work, you don't have time to play the game, you can just really quickly like log in and convert your AP into a blue apple. So that's what it kind of allows you to do, is take that and move it towards the future. Unlike condensed resin and something like Genshin, there is no limitation as to how many of these things you can hold. You can make multiple at a time, so it is what it is. But that being said, you do have a finite amount of saplings, so my advice is don't overmake them. Again, I have an entire video talking about AP efficiency that goes over blue apples. I highly recommend checking that out. But in the interim, the best advice I can give you is to always make sure you do at least 3 different runs a day. That'll complete your dailies and get you all those nice mana prisms and tickets for ascension materials. And then after that, with whatever remaining AP you have for the rest of the day, then you can absolutely make blue apples if you don't find anything else to do. I also recommend, if there is an event going on, not making blue apples. If there is a half cost or lucrative farming opportunity, not making blue apples. In fact, those will be what you'll want to make the blue apples for. So where you usually want to do it is when there's no other good beneficial campaign going on, there is no event going on, and it's just pure dead time. When that's the case, that's the most opportune time to go ahead and say, you know what, why don't I convert blue apples? That being said, this did end up being quite a bit of an issue on JP, as the devs talked about it with their anniversary interview last year, that this was the whole reason that they made the ordeal call Storm Pods, and the whole reason that they're limited is kind of to help combat this issue with players not playing the game as much because of blue apples, and people kind of overly making blue apples to their own detriment. That is to say, they weren't actually going out and farming things that they needed to, and they were instead just constantly making it as an excuse not to play. So that is my warning to you, is don't overmake them, but certainly if there is just true dead time, there's no reason not to make them at that point, because it allows you to basically take the AP from that dead time and move it to a time where it is more lucrative to use, like raids, lottos, you name it. So again, Blue Apple's gonna come into the game here. Gonna be a game changer for NA. We should get some interesting game updates here. This is where the tutorial summoning gets adjusted again. The big and interesting one is Helena comes off the tutorial summon and Nitocris comes onto the tutorial summon here. So it sucks losing Helena because she was a really good pseudo support and AoE caster for people. She was kind of the go-to recommendation that I said. There are a couple other changes here, but to me, this is the big one. That being said, Nitocris is absolutely fantastic to start the game with. So yeah, both of those are still really, really good in my opinion. Followers will increase to 10, but that's not as huge of an issue because we start getting the changes later on where you don't care if somebody is actually like following you or your friend. You can still use everybody's NP anyways. But that's not right here. I believe that comes later on at Anniversary. Again, it gives you a little bit more of a detailed breakdown of where you get your FP gains from. First NP as normal speed option is revamped. And then the mission rewards to receive all button is definitely nice, though I believe we already have that for NA. And you can see, basically, this is where JP got pretty much the remainder of their full screen NPs. NA kind of already has this stuff, so really not too much to look forward to other than a couple of the first ones there. But then we get an actual summoning campaign, in fact, 2 of them right here. So the first one is going to be with Castoria. Now, I probably shouldn't have to go over Castoria for you guys, but just in the case that maybe this is someone's first video that they're watching, maybe this is your intro to FGO, I am going to make the case for rolling Artoria Caster over every other unit this year. Artoria Caster is arguably the best unit in the game, and the reason for this, to help you understand, is basically just the summation of the entire kit. Artoria Caster is a 50% charger. We love that. We look for that in our meta supports, and it's really strong. On top of that, one of the skills that she has is a 30% party-wide charge. So even though she can charge one unit to 50%, everybody in the party gets 30%, which in a lot of hilarious cases allows Artoria herself to get to her own NP. And it is a absolutely game-changing NP as far as things go. So having a support that can kind of power themselves to being able to get to their own NP is really strong while helping everybody else get there. She helps people loop, she helps people, she helps protect people, and she also gives them threat against humanity niche. So there's just a ton of good here. She's got a triple arts deck. And this is just, really, really quick kind of like breaking her down here. But again, she's got some really nice steroids and stuff in her kit. Some nice flexibility in how she is used. Just absolutely awesome passive skills. And then the real breadwinner here is the NP. This is a support NP. It basically increases the party's attack for 3 turns by a minimum of 30%, but if you manage to be lucky enough to have multiple NP levels up for it, goes all the way up to 50%. This is a very strong steroid, potentially. It's also going to cleanse the entire party of debuffs. This is actually really good, and why things like buff block and such don't really work on Castoria, because she can remove them with her NP. But the real sort of takeaway here is that the overcharge effect grants anti-purge defense for in attacks over 3 turns. What does that mean? So this means that it scales with the overcharge, and the amount of overcharge that you have will grant her more stacks of anti-purge defense. And anti-purge defense is a special form, basically, of invincibility that cannot be pierced. That's kind of what you see right here, is that anti-purge defense nullifies invincibility and damage. So you are absolutely protected right there with that. And pretty much one of the only things that is going to be able to stop you is something like buff removal before damage or something like that. You have to be very careful of those units, but otherwise, Artoria Caster, it's really good at protecting the party. It is absolutely fantastic at cleansing and buffing the attack power there. And you can use this in so many different ways, including a comp that we like to call the Invincible comp, because it, is such a amazing setup that it works in basically 90% of the different challenge quests that are out there. And it is strong because of that. It definitely requires other pieces to make that comp, but the real reason it works is because of Castoria. So this is why, even though we have some really stellar supports out there in the Buster category and the Quick categories, even though Oberon exists in the game and he can provide 70% charge to the party, Artoria Caster is still to this day probably the unit that if you put a gun to my head and said you can only have one unit as a support, I'm going to take her 10 out of 10 times and not regret it. She is just that strong and that good. So I highly recommend for any new player, if you do not have Artoria Caster, you need to be thinking about rolling for her. Certainly you can play the game without her. She is not a must-have, but she's probably the closest thing the game has to a must-have, because she will just make your life easier. She will make your time in the game a lot more efficient and valuable, and she will make you, you will only regret not rolling her rather than, ever regretting having her. So again, at the end of the day, I have to say that this should be kind of the number one thing on everyone's list if they don't have her. Next up here, you've got Barghest, and she is a story-locked unit from LB6. Barghest has had a ton of banners, so a lot of people already have her, but if you're looking to get more copies of her or you just really like her, again, this is a fantastic unit. We talked earlier about some of the 90++ quests that are recollection quests and how, you may want to solo them. Kind of the reason that we talked about Barghest and Baobhan Sith is because both of them are very good at that. They are exceedingly good challenge units, and they still have decent damage levels on their NP. Part of the reason for this is because, again, you end up with, say, a triple buster gorilla deck for Barghest, and that just really helps her. She also gets extra damage on sunlight battlefields. Unlike her other contemporaries, though, she does not have the ability to bring the sun. That is to say, she cannot change the battlefield to sunlight. But as long as you're on a sunlight battlefield, you're just going to get even more buster performance out of her. But I think the real, awesome skill that she has is right here. It's Wild Rule A. This is going to increase her own buster performance for 3 turns, grant herself survival of the fittest for 3 turns, which basically recovers her own HP by 1,000 whenever she normal attacks. So not an NP, but this does include things like an extra attack. And it will remove 1 latest buff from an enemy when normal attacking. So if you're in a solo environment or you just happen to have a Brave Chain with her, she's going to remove a ton of buffs from the enemy, and this lasts for 3 turns, so she's just going to keep doing it potentially. So there is a lot of really good capability there. And then if she does successfully remove a buff, it basically has a 500% chance to reduce their defense by 10% for 3 turns. And that's just going to keep stacking. So that's, again, a really nice skill there. And then, like we said, it still came with the 30% buster up right there, right on out of the get-go. So it is absolutely fantastic for challenged environments. Her third skill here gives party damage taken reduction for 3 attacks, 3 turns. It's basically a damage cut there for the entire party. But then it also grants a regeneration buff that gives her up to 15% charge per turn. So it's going to help you get to an NP, and you're going to want to get to Barghest's NP, especially if you're soloing with her. But again, the reason for that is going to be because it deals damage to all enemies and then basically heals her for 3,000 by 5 turns. If you're unsure of what max HP is and does, understand that it is a heal, but that it also doesn't care how much health you have. So to make this clear, if you had a cap of 12,000 HP and you were sitting at 10,000 HP and you healed by 3,000, you basically would only get 2,000 HP out of that. But if you did max HP for your heal, you would get all 3,000. It would just increase the amount of HP that you have over your cap temporarily. So it will always heal you in that regard. It will always add effective health to you, and that makes it really, really useful. The downside to something like max HP is that unlike a heal, it can be buff blocked. So that's something you have to pay attention to, is that it can actually be prevented because it is a buff. And so that's something you got to understand about it. But then to top it all off, if that wasn't good enough, so she deals AoE damage, she heals herself by a ton for 5 turns, and then boom, she reduces her skill cooldowns by 1. So the more MPs you get to, the more healing you do, and the faster you get back to your skills. That's where you're going to really want to just keep Barghest looping. That's what makes her so strong in a solo environment, because she's just going to keep getting her cards. And that's again where she's going to also be pretty decent for you in a farming environment too, depending on what you're doing. She then also increases her burst performance for 1 turn, activating first by 20%. So again, Barcast, fantastic unit. Highly recommend checking her out if you don't have her. She's not going to end up being, say, the best saber in the game for a lot of you, but she will be a very serviceable unit, very fun to use. So we just got done talking about her, so now let's talk about Baobhan Sith. And again, Sith is a really interesting unit, I would say. She's a quick single target archer. And the way to think about her is she's sort of a upgrade, if you will, to Tristan. Tristan's gotten some upgrades that have brought him back into parity with Baobhan Sith, but I still kind of prefer Baobhan Sith's kit over his. And part of the reason for that is she doesn't really have the demerits that he does. She does have some, but they're not, to me, as impactful. Her first skill grants quick performance of 3 turns, self-invincibility for 1 turn, and then party evasion for 1 attack. So it's like a souped-up version of the Harp of Healing skill that Tristan and David have. It does have the demerit there, but then she also has a second skill that seals all enemies in P for 1 turn, rather than Tristan's where he seals himself, which I think is just stupid. Thankfully, he does have the cleanse now to help him deal with that. But then it's also going to seal their skills for 1 turn and charge her own gauge. The only thing you got to be careful of with this skill is that when you pop it, because the enemy's NP and skills are sealed, they will attack you. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that you're basically forcing the enemy to just start carding you. And if that happens, yeah, you might get beat to death if you're not prepared for it. So just watch out for that. And then her third skill ends up being another 30% charge there. So now she's got 60, but it's also a vampirism skill. So it drains not only their charge, but also their HP. So this is really good. It means that basically Baobhan Sith has a lot of survivability, a lot of self-sustain. And it really does work for her in that regard because she just has the ability to stall enemies out and kind of outlast them. Add in some actual healing command codes, and like I said, that made in Halloween CE that you could use on either her or Barcast, and you'll have a lot of good, like, both firepower, survivability, and sustain ability to keep going in the fight because you have so much healing. She does end up with an NP that has Sure Hit on it, so you don't get Invuln Pierce or something like that, but really, Sure Hit is probably looked down upon a lot these days, but it's still very useful when it is useful, right? So as long as the enemy is dodging, it's going to be of use to you. She's then going to deal damage to one enemy and inflict curse status for 1,000 damage to 5 turns to them, so not too much extra damage there, but you do at least get the evil curse effect that's going to increase it by 200% for the 5-turn duration. So you will get some decent chunks of curse damage out of this, especially if you are looping her NP and repeatedly applying the curse stack. So there is that to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. But like I said, I do find Baobhan Sith to be very good. The, ironically enough, area that she is most efficient in is actually her damage output. Her damage output is not the best because of how strong the rest of her kit is. That being said, damage is one of the easiest things to fix in the game, since if you're going to have a demerit, having a damage demerit just means that you could probably throw on better Cs and support with better supports, and it should work out. But if you have kit demerits, then there's not a lot you can do to fix that a lot of the times, and you're just kind of stuck with the hand that you're dealt. But again, Baobhan Sith does not have that issue, so you're going to be perfectly fine with her. And then our other LB6 4-star, but this one is a permanent unit, and it's Percival. I think Percival's coming late to the game at this point. He's another 4-star AoE Lancer, but he's actually quite nice. He's AoE arts and basically ends up being a very nice split between a tank and a farmer type unit. And to make that apparent, you need to only look really at his first skill. It's going to increase his arts performance for 3 turns, charge his own gauge, and increase the party's NP damage for 3 turns. You can already see that he just kind of has a ton going on in one skill, and this is going to continue throughout his kit as he basically ends up just having this ability to easily farm, easily kind of loop and go through, while still managing to have a taunt to secure even more charge should he need it, because it also has NP generation rate whenever he takes an attack. This is going to increase it by 50%. So his natural rate of 4% means it's going to get up to functionally 6% per hit. So that is per hit per attack. Some enemies' attacks have multiple hits in them, like say the insects that'll hit like 3, 4, 5 times per hit. And so as a result, you're getting a lot of charge there if the enemy has a high hit count with their attacks. So it can be really, really nice for him if he manages to get like countered by an enemy or actually attacked. If you're just farming with him, odds are this won't come into play, but if you're in a challenge environment, yes, this absolutely could help him out. And then his third skill ends up being a targetable invincibility with heal. So again, this could be used on himself or on someone else. This is why we say he's actually a really good tank because of his second and third skill, whereas his first skill handles like all of the farming needs right off the bat. So again, I think you'll find he's actually really serviceable. His NP does have invincibility pierce. It deals damage to all enemies, and then it recovers the ally with the lowest HP. So it is a smart heal because it will always go with the unit with the lowest relative HP. That means percentage-wise, if you will. So the unit that's at 20% of their total maximum HP versus the unit that's at 25% of their total maximum HP. Again, it'll heal the unit that's at 20% first. And that may be weird because you may see, you know, he might heal a unit that has 3,000 health before he heals the unit that has 2,000 health. That just depends on the maximum health values, and so you got to be careful with that. But again, it is a smart heal other than for that 1 point. And then his overcharge will increase NP damage for 1 turn, so definitely nice to have a damage dealing overcharge effect. And that is that first banner there. You do get Celebrate Memories back here. This one is a 60% charging CE, but sadly it's not one of the better ones as it is split stats. Otherwise, I would say it's pretty decent since it's quick and buster, but yeah, this is what it is. Again, if you just need a 60% starting charge CE with additional effects, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I just probably don't recommend actually investing in leveling the CE since its attack power is not going to scale very far. Again, nothing too much really to look at here. You got Filler Flower that actually does grant healing per turn, but it's not going to really keep you alive in the grand scheme of things. And then we get to our second banner here, and this one's going to actually end up having, again, Miss Crane, Yang Yifei, Shuten Doji, Jacques De Molay, and obviously Jalter and Cleo here. So really a nice one in regards to this. So starting off the bat here with Miss Crane, I think Miss Crane gets a bad rap. I definitely understand why, though. She is, amongst all supports that are out there, she is very niche. It doesn't mean she's bad. In fact, I can argue that she is very good at what she does. It's just you probably don't need what she does that often. If you want to roll for her because you like her design or because you want her for collection's sake, go for it. But where she is probably best used is in a challenge environment. That is to say, she really wants to have break bars be in place. And the reason for this is partially because of her NP and the way it works. She can only use her own NP when she has 20 critical stars or more. This will increase the first ally's attack, except for herself, for 3 turns, increase their NP damage by 30% for 3 turns, and then move Miss Crane to the last available reserve slot. So, the understanding here is that logically you want these buffs to go off and then you want Miss Crane to be kind of out. But you have to be careful about how you use her because her overcharge effect charges the first ally's NP gauge except for herself. You can use this to charge somebody else who's not gonna handle the current like wave or break bar, but you have to be careful with that because that also means that like all of the buffing is going to that first unit that is not NPing that turn too. So this is where, like I said, it actually works out really well where you're in a break bar environment because then you can fire off that unit's NP, have them break the bar, and then Miss Crane bestows them all these extra buffs and charges their NP gauge back as well, acting as a, you know, pseudo plug suit rotation here. So it's a really, really nice thing to have. She also does have party-wide invincibility for 1 turn, party star generation, and she basically can get to her 20 stars as long as there are 2 costume-owning units currently in the party except herself. This is a difficult thing to achieve because, one, not that many units in the game have costumes. There are quite a few, but like there's still going to be more that don't have a costume than do. And from there, you need 2 of them, and you need the skill Lord in order to get the 20 that you would need flat out for that. So Again, you can do this. You can try to skew it in your favor to make sure that you always have costume owning servants in the party. Or you can just try to have some additional stars rolling into that turn somehow by having used a quick card or something like that. It doesn't really matter how you do it. It only matters that you have the stars in order to do it. Her second skill charges her own gauge up to 100%, so they were kind of evil. They made it stop exactly at 100%. But again, this will allow you to lure it and then basically be able to take her 0 to 100, you know, right off the bat. A way around this would be to only level it basically to rank 7 and then instead to end up unlocking her mana loading if that somehow is cheaper for you. Maybe you want to go to like something like rank 8 and then basically go to like rank 6 on the mana loading, sparing you a crystallized lore for either of those two skills. Either of those options would certainly be possible and might save you 1 or maybe even 2 lores, depending on how you look at it. It's also a taunt, so that's kind of one of the other reasons that you might want her in the party, but it is what it is. And then she has the ability to basically increase a target's critical star absorption and crit damage, as well as give them instant kill immunity, a somewhat rare but nice niche. I think my only issue with this effect here is that it's not party-wide. I feel like it would be better then because, yeah, she's obviously going to rotate herself out when she pops her NP, and then you'll have the one unit having instant death immunity, but you're not going to have the other unit having it, and that's going to cause some problems, I would say. But again, that's Miss Crane in a nutshell. She's very good. The way to think about her is she is a somewhat free plug suit rotation. Okay, so if you think about like units like a Rash or units like Qinggong, they're nice in the fact that they rotate the party, but the downside is they have to kill someone, either themselves or another target. Miss Crane is going to rotate the party without killing herself, so she is relatively free, only at the cost of crit stars. So that's the way I choose to think about her, is as a sort of force multiplier in a break bar scenario. And in that regard, she's really good at it. But do you have to have that? No, not by any means. And so I think you'll see that a lot of people either have not bothered with her or just basically say she's not really worth my going after type deal. And that if she shows up at a GSSR or something, she shows up. But again, I would at least say, you know, give her a look and see if you think she's right for you. Next up, we have Jalter here, and Jalter's an interesting unit because historically Jalter has always been the highest attack power unit in the entire game. And it's easy to see why, as she's got 13k attack. It's strong. I have seen a lot of people over the years that have said that Jalter is overhyped, that she basically does not deserve the attention that she gets. I attribute most of this to jealousy because she's just a popular unit and people are trying to be contrarian. Because if you've ever actually looked at Jalter's numbers, you would know she is worthy of that attention. A lot of the people have a tendency to flaunt like her lesser damage numbers, comparing them like, let's say, comparing Jalter to like a single target Saber, and then being like, ha, Jalter does less damage. Here's the problem with that logic. A lot of the times the person is using the Saber in an actual effective environment and Jalter in a neutral environment. That is naturally unfair to Jalter. Here's the thing. The fact that she draws the comparison with neutral numbers should tell you a lot about how strong Jalter is. The fact that she is competing using neutral numbers in most of those scenarios means that Jalter hits like a Mack truck. She is absolutely fantastic for offensive output. Let no one ever tell you otherwise. And that is pretty clear as you come down here to the first skill and look at what it does. Critical damage for 3 turns, critical star absorption for 3 turns by 50%. So she's got a 50% crit up for 3 turns. Her second skill here is party-wide attack for 3 turns by 20%, so just a solid charisma. But then anyone with a dragon trait gets another 20%. Sadly, this does not include herself, but any of the other Artoria faces would be included in that. So definitely really nice that she has this, though it is much more of a niche thing. And then her third skill is Buster Performance for 1 turn of 50%, Stealth Invincibility, and then the real weakness that Jalter has never been damage. It has always been how much health she has. Jalter only has 11.7k HP as an SSR. This is a 4-star number. And the reason why is because this is like a 6-star number in terms of the attack stat. So there is a trade-off. And she does further reduce that already anemic HP by 1,000 whenever she pops her 3rd skill. So you have to be careful and make sure that you kind of baby Jalter and keep her alive. But if you keep her alive, it will pay off. She will absolutely destroy any target that she's up against. Again, she has had an NP interlude though, and this is because they ended up coming out with a unit that had crazy scalability called Tyra. Tyra is a really solid unit. I think her biggest issue is that, yes, her damage is actually insane if you have all the niches in play, but she will almost never have all of her niches in play. Her main niche that does a ton of damage is the Genji trait, and that is somewhat rare. In fact, with the Samurai Remnant collab coming up on JP, we may see some more Genji units come into the game. Hopefully so for Tyra's sake. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be somewhat niche of a trait no matter what the devs do. And I think the real concern that Tyra had facing Jalter was not that much damage there. Because Jalter should normally trounce Tyra in damage. The issue was how survivable Tyra was, and the fact that with her being a quick NP, she had the capability with her NP and her carding after it to get far more refund and had far more loopability than as a result compared to a unit like Jalter. The Jalter had to be brute forced in order to get to her NP a lot of the time, or you had to rely on a lucky arts crit, you know, but again, not like you're going to have the best of opportunities to be able to get that. Still, it's just one of those things that would happen, and if it does happen and all the stars align for Jalter, you can loot, but it required far more luck on Jalter's end than it ever did on Tyra's end, and I think the devs took a look at that and said, Tyra has crazy damage potential, even though she doesn't realize it most of the time. Absolutely just disgusting survivability. And then, again, paired that with the ability to potentially loot. And I think the devs said, look, Jalter does one thing really well. Damage. So if we take everything else away from her, but then still provide some times where the other unit will outdamage her, she has nothing left. And so I think that's why the devs came back in and said, yeah, we know this is a strong unit. We don't care, have an NP interlude. Just to allow her to continue to stand out in the face of her competition. And I think it's a good upgrade for her. I think it really does help things out. Because not only does it give her more damage, which is just going to be even better for her, it also ends up giving her a 30 crit star bomb. And that was one of the other knocks that we had with Jalter, is that while her crit skill was nice, it did not have nearly enough absorption for the shit-ass normal absorption of an Avenger here. And I think that bears worth mentioning. That being said, stars are probably one of the easier things to fix. You can always flood the party with stars, and that got proven in regards to how the devs chose to upgrade her. They didn't give her more star absorption. They didn't give her stars per turn. They just gave her 30 extra stars whenever she NPs. Kind of proving that, yeah, the easiest way to deal with this is just flood the party, and then if there's over 50 stars, you don't care. Everyone's cards are critting. So that's kind of what they did with Jalter, and it really does help that scenario out quite a bit. But then again, the other really nice thing with Jalter is the fact that she can buff block. I have used this to great effect on some bosses in a hilarious way, including going up against someone the likes of QSH, where yes, he's obviously a ruler, so she'll be effective against him, but more importantly, QSH relies completely on his buffs in order to do what he does. And so if he can't get his buffs off, he's not going to be able to actually do anything to you. And so as a result, having someone like Jalter going up against something like that is just really nice. Because again, a lot of how those units will work is they will pop one skill that gives them 3 buffs. Well, if the source of all the buffs is from one effect, then even though it's only a one-time buff block, it will block them. So it's not going to matter in that regard. You can block multiple buffs, even with a one-time buff block. The other cool thing about this one is, please denote, there's no expiration on this buff block. So it is very much a set it and forget it type of deal. You can kind of wait until the enemy tries to do stuff like that. But again, yes, I highly recommend Jalter. She's absolutely fantastic. She has saved my bacon numerous times in the Saberface runs just because of how strong she actually is. So again, definitely check her out, especially if you like her. You'll now have access to her costume as of this point. Next up, we have Yang. Yang is a single target foreigner. She ends up being arts, and I do think it really works for her. I actually really like Yang's kit now. When she first came out, there was a lot of initial like hype because people like just really liked her thighs and her design. But then I think as people settled in, people realized that her performance was not good. And this largely had to do with the way her kit kind of worked. Originally, her kit only had the ability to taunt male enemies, and that ended up being kind of a problem because you want people to hit Yang. The reason for this is because her third skill, whenever she has it pop, means that if an enemy hits her during that duration of that skill, they will inflict burn on themselves when that happens. And you might say like, okay, that's nice, Cad, but you know, you don't need that much, you don't get that much damage out of a burn. Well, Yang's the exception here because Yang absolutely does, since her NP deals extra damage, super effective extra damage to enemies that have a burn debuff. So how much damage Yang dealt with her NP was wildly dependent on an enemy hitting Yang. Now, certainly you could address this with things like command codes or having another unit there to provide burn. Those were always options for Yang, and they worked and they were nice. But in a challenged environment, it's still really nice to have that capability to force the enemy to hit her and have them burn themselves. It really helps keep the burn stacks going. It really helps keep this super effective damage online. So again, I cannot stress enough how much of a pain in the butt it was that this was restricted to male only, because not only does that obviously phase out all females and unknown genders, but it also phases out plenty of other units that are genderless. That is to say, like just monsters that don't normally have a gender would not be affected by this skill. So it specifically only affected something that had the male trait. And that's why they ended up buffing this and just removing the qualification. So it's just a taunt now. There is no qualification. And that worked infinitely better. So it's really, really good for Yang now that she has this. I do think she is a fantastic sort of boss killing foreigner. She's not going to have sort of that buff strip ability that Abby has and such, but I do think the loop ability is why you're probably going to end up using Yang. And she does have the ability to basically drain the entire enemy wave, although this is something where even though she's single target, the drain is AoE, so you kind of regret almost going one-on-one against enemies since you can't drain as much, or rather charge as much for yourself. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and she is a good unit. So I do recommend checking her out if you haven't already. Up next here is Shuten Doji. Shuten is a interesting unit. I'm going to say she's probably not trending as well nowadays on JP as she used to for NA. For a long period in time, Shuten Doji was like the gold standard of AoE assassins. The reason for this was just that she hit hard and nothing else really. The fact that she, hit hard, dealt a lot of debuffs to the enemy, you were pretty well set up to, even if you didn't kill, in order to be able to like deal more damage and, kind of watch the enemy be debilitated after the fact. Shuten, though, ends up getting passed basically by several welfares, so they ended up coming back and giving Shuten an NP interlude at some point that really did help this out. It also inflicted the toxic status at that point, kind of increasing the amount of poison damage you got off of her effect. So another really nice thing for a unit that's known to be a poisoner. But at the end of the day, I think we still have seen her get power creeped even more here as more welfares have come out, as AoE Assassin is one of the most populous welfare categories. And so more and more of them came out, more and more of them were power creeping, more and more of them were getting stronger and stronger. Again, we talked about Gray earlier, and she is just a fantastic unit at this point with her NP interlude, and that I think really helped challenge units like Shuten. So the devs ended up having to come back and give her 30% charge on her third skill, and that helped out as well because that made her much more of a farming option. Remember, units that don't have charge, especially Shuten in her case, because even though she's art, she only has a single hit NP. So she does not generate a lot of Noble Phantasm, regardless of what supports you're using with her. So the fact that she didn't have charge meant that she was kind of getting left behind. She was not, even though she had a lot of firepower, she was not really able to, multi-turn NP too often, and it really was to her demerit. But having that 30% charge was a game changer. This does allow her to be able to be 3-turned quite a bit more than she could in the past. And I do think that this really, again, helps her out. But helping her out is keeping her kind of in the hunt. She's in competition with the other units, but I wouldn't tell you that she's the best anymore because of this. Granted, if you wanted to roll multiple MP levels of her, she will be a very powerful 5-star for you at that point. And certainly that would allow you to kind of at least face check the other units. Jacques De Molay is our next one up here. She is an AoE quick foreigner. Jacques De Molay's got 50% charge, and for a while there, I would have told you that Jacques De Molay was just a better version of everything that Voyager was trying to be. Part of the reason for this is because she grants the party evil alignment, and she charges the party's gauge by 20%, basically off of a skill rather than off of an NP. That does mean that Voyager has it to be able to spam it, but that does mean that Jacques De Molay has it on command when necessary at the right time. So there is that. She did have the self-invincibility and the ability to charge her own NP by 30%, making her the 50% charger, and then grant invincibility to allies with the evil alignment except herself. So basically the first skill makes them evil, the second skill gives them invuln for being evil. And then her third skill here actually did end up getting an upgrade. It was sadly not that good of an upgrade. It's not bad, but it's not, what I think a lot of people were hoping for her. It basically gave her an on-attack activate debuff that inflicts curse with 500 damage for 3 turns to an enemy when normal attacking. The reason this buff happened and the reason it's pretty okay is because this allowed her to put curse on with a skill before her NP. And as you can see here, her NP deals damage to all enemies, inflicts curse status to them, and then inflicts evil curse status to them, and increases her own NP damage for 3 turns. So basically just sitting there, able to stack that curse damage on people, able to get it rolling even faster rather than having to wait for the NP. Definitely a nice thing for her. And so again, I think Jacques De Molay is decent still, but I think Voyager with his upgrades and the amount of attention he's gotten, probably a little bit more useful, at least at this point for the party. But again, they're in somewhat parity, I can say. So if you want a quick AoE foreigner, Jacques De Molay, definitely an interesting one. But again, it's up to you to determine whether or not you wish to pursue this unit. And then we get to Cleo. Now, Cleo catches a lot of flack, and I'm going to say it's at least partially deserved. The reason that it's partially deserved is because a lot of people look to Cleo and go, man, I kind of like her, but I can't really farm with her. This would have been true in the past, but now that Oberon is here, she does end up having an NP gauge by 10% every turn for 3 turns, which means that she has 10% charge in her kit, which means that she can be brute forced into 3 turning. So it does exist. The reason, though, that those people are still somewhat right is because as you look at the rest of her kit, you will see that she has Imperial privilege. And so essentially that RNG aspect and the fact that she doesn't have a lot of charge in the kit means that she's probably not going to be your go-to choice as a farmer. Here's the reason that I say that these people are wrong, though. Cleo is still a fantastic unit. Here's why. So the first skill is Imperial Privilege that gives attack and defense up by 40%, but it also heals by 3,000 on a 5-turn cooldown. That's really good for survival purposes. Her second skill has NP generation by 40% for 3 turns, NP charge by 10% every single turn for 3 turns, and then recovers her own HP every turn for 3 turns by 1,000. So now you've got 3,000 healing here, 3,000 healing here for a whopping total of 6,000. And then your third skill ends up being a hard survivability skill, a cleanse, and a star bomb. The thing I think that people are missing on Cleo is that they're missing the fact that Cleo actually has really good card capability. You look at this NP gain rate, and that should have been your clue that this is actually really high, especially with pretty decent hit counts. The arts card is the low one, and you only have one of it, but everything else here is really good. So again, I think when you combine all of this with all of her buffing and potential and survivability, she's actually really good down the stretch in a knockdown drag out fight for an assassin. So that's where I'm going to say again, I think a lot of people are actually missing the forest for the trees. Her NP does deal damage to all enemies and buff blocks them, which again, I think is another thing that people forget about her. So you can tell she really is geared not towards farm, but more towards challenge. And I do think that serves her well. So again, if you're looking at Cleo to be your AoE farming assassin, it's probably not the best choice. But if you're looking for a challenge unit that's an AoE assassin, yeah, Cleo is absolutely really good at that, and probably the best AoE assassin for challenge in that regard. So again, don't basically write her off. So again, here is your banner timings. You can see everybody's going to get 2-day banners on that. Same thing basically with the first one, although they didn't end up posting the schedule for that one. But you can see here, essentially each one of them is going to get their own banner, so you don't have to worry about overlap or anything like that. Now, I have to talk about craft essences in this. So let's go back basically. No, actually we did already cover the first one. So let's talk about each one of these. So Honey Lake is the first one up. If you do not have a copy of Honey Lake, I highly recommend getting a copy of Honey Lake. MLB is preferable, but I'm not going to tell you to roll just for a CE to get MLB. I would recommend getting at least the one copy though. If you have MLB, it will scale up to 2000 attack, making it a really good candidate to level up. But even if you don't, even if you only get the one copy, you still get a CE that ignores invincibility and increases damage against enemies with burn status by 35%. On paper, you might be thinking this isn't that strong. But let me explain something to you. It doesn't matter what unit you use this with, because command codes that inflict burn exist, and the burn will always land before the damage goes out. So this means that every single one of those cards that you have will deal more damage the second you land a burn on them. This is a 35% power mod, 40% if you're at MLB. That affects not just your NP, but every single attack you do. That's what makes Honey Lake so strong. People talk all the time about how much they think that something like Golden Sumo is good. Golden Sumo is a strong CE. Honey Lake absolutely trounces it. And this is the reason why. Especially at an MLB, this CE is just adding basically 40% more damage to everything you do. Everything. As long as you can keep the burn up. And at that point, you guys got to remember that your cards rotate every 3 turns, and most burn command codes last 3 turns. So you're just going to be able to sit there and keep burn stacked on these enemies over and over and over again, just allowing you to constantly get the benefit of this. The downside to something like this versus something like, say, Golden Sumo or other types of CEs is simply the fact that the enemy could be immune. And if the enemy is immune, then yes, Honey Lake is absolutely going to be useless for you. But as long as the enemy isn't immune and you can keep landing those command codes on the enemy, or you have a unit that provides burn in their own kit, like Yang, you have the capability of just absolutely getting a ton more damage. So Honey Lake, still to this day, one of the best CEs in the game. But here's the problem with it. It's not the only 5-star here. The next one up is Pharaoh Chocolatl. And Pharaoh Chocolatl here is all attack scaling. It has NP generation rate of 20%, NP damage of 15%, and buster performance of 15%. So it is not a bad CE. I do question the NP gain with the pairing of Buster, but besides that, I think I'm a-okay here, and I do think this would be strong down the stretch as well. So it's not a bad CE by any means, so why did I caution you? And it's simply because of the fact that these 3 CEs are all 5 stars. So if you're trying to end up getting just Honey Lake, you might end up having bad RNG and just getting all of the other 2 instead. So keep that in mind. It's always dangerous to roll things that are split rate up. Mystery Treasure here is also a really nice CE for the art, but regardless, it is split stat, and that is its one demerit, because otherwise it would be a fantastic CE. It's starting battle at 50% gauge, arts and buster up of 10%, and increased critical damage of 10%. So really solid for a unit that kind of straddles between arts and buster. But again, the fact that it is split stats is just going to make it so that you don't want to level it, potentially. But yeah, like I said, really, really good CEs here to choose from. I especially recommend Honey Lake, but outside of that, that is your 25 million downloads campaign in a nutshell. All right, now on to the next one. We have the RATJAM pre-release campaign. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Hey, here comes RATJAM, also Constantine. We'll talk about that. The important thing here is that basically Constantine is kind of a miss on the devs' part. He's not a bad unit. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean, he's absolutely usable and he is good at what he does. I think the issue at play with a unit like Constantine is that almost nobody needs this. So if you're going to roll for him, it ends up being because you just really like the character, you really like the design, you really just want to see this unit in your Chaldea. And by all means, go for it, but it is definitely a weird choice for a unit, a weird design for a unit. So you can see they increase his NP generation rate for 1 turn with this first skill, give him a taunt, and grant him critical stars. So you're already kind of getting some like Georgios type of vibes, and that is, I think, what they were going for. He increases the party's attack for 3 turns, increases the party's buster performance for 3 turns, and increases the critical damage of all Roman allies for 3 turns because, yes, he is Roman. That is to say, he is considered, even though he is a Byzantine emperor, to be Roman. His third skill basically allows him to charge his own NP gauge, increase his own critical damage, gain critical stars every single turn, and then when he is defeated, charges the last ally's NP gauge except for himself by 30%. So, an interesting effect there. It's also going to increase the last ally's critical damage except for self for 3 turns, and critical star regeneration buff except for self for 3 turns. So, he's kind of a 5-star sacrificial lamb type of unit, and it's interesting, but not the best or the easiest to use in that regard. That's a lot of party cost to be investing on a unit like this. But if that weren't enough, we can look at the NP and go, okay, so what does it do? It's a support NP. It's a buster support NP. It increases his own buster performance for 3 turns, grants himself invincibility for 1 attack, 1 turn, and reduces the damage taken of Roman allies by 5,000 for 1 turn. From there, it also increases the party's defense for 1 turn by 100%. That is what Constantine is. A tank. A really, really beefy tank. And in that regard, he's absolutely great at being able to like soak the damage and kind of weather it. The problem is he really needs that NP, and he really just doesn't have a whole lot of charge to help set that up and enable it. So you've got to have some mechanism of getting him to his NP. And I think this is where, like I said, I see what they were going for, but it just doesn't feel that strong in the grand scheme of things. Especially not in a game where everybody has MASH. Everybody can get access to Georgios and, Leonidas and various other low-star units that can help with either rotating the party, tanking some damage, again, you name it. So at the end of the day, I have to look at this and go like, it's interesting. And I do like the design aesthetic of the unit, but I'm not sure I agree with how they chose to go about designing Constantine's kit. I do think Constantine could use an upgrade at this point because, to my knowledge, there are not that many people using him. But I will say that they have to be careful with how they do buff him. Because if they make him too strong, then yeah, you're going to end up in a scenario where basically nobody's taking damage, Constantine's just unkillable, and you have a real problem on your hands. Constantine's really good at soaking a lot of damage for at least one turn. After that turn, though, that's where I kind of have issues with him, is down the stretch in a sustain. So it is what it is. Also, the fact that the party-wide defense up of 100% only lasts one turn, but so does the self-invincibility. You weren't going to take a lot of damage that turn anyway, so I'm really surprised that they don't extend this duration to like 3 turns or something like that, just in case he doesn't get hit that turn. But it is what it is. So again, he does have the damage cut. The damage cut's 5,000 as well, so that's also going to reduce a ton of damage. And this is where, again, like I said, I do think he can be fun to use in some niche comps, but it's going to be more of a challenge unit than anything else. So I don't really have a lot of good things to say about Constantine. I wish I did. And again, I don't think he's unusable. So if you're feeling like I'm being too harsh with him, please, by all means, still roll for him. But I am going to say that I feel like Constantine at this point in time has not panned out well for how they implemented him. And they probably do need to consider giving him a buff. Maybe even an NP interlude already. But it is what it is. Okay, so that is your pre-release campaign in a nutshell there. We do end up having the Tunguska Sanctuary release commemorative summoning campaign. So you guys remember that we were getting some of these main interlude campaigns where the main interlude came back and it was free now. That's exactly what this is. This is this, but for Tunguska. So for those of you that have done Tunguska, but you don't have access to it now that the event has ended, this will bring it back in perpetuity for everyone. So it's really, really nice that they did this. This will also serve as part of the pre-release campaign part 2 and ends up being its actual summoning banner. So the way to think about this is, yes, everything is now here. Everything is now potentially free, but this is going to be another banner for Taigong Wang. We already talked about him in the Chaldea Boys review. That was your first shot at rolling him again. But this version will have Dobrynya alongside. So if you do really like her, you've got that going for you. You will also have the opportunity to roll for the CEs, of which, again, Empty Garden is actually somewhat good. It is all attack scaling. It is starting gauge of 50%. Quicken Buster Performance of 10%, and then critical damage of 10% right there. So really, really nice as far as CEs go. Again, I saw a lot of people complaining when the Ivan raid got missed that this devalued the CEs. I'm going to say the people that were rolling the CE just for the bond effect for a couple of days were the ones that were actually missing out. The people that actually rolled the CE because the CE is a good CE down the stretch, congratulations, you profited. But again, you do not have to have this CE by any means. It is just one of another in a series of good CEs. So let's talk about Dobrynya. Dobrynya is a unit that I really like the design for. I really just love a lot of what they did with her. But before I start gushing about that, let's be fair and talk about the kit, because the kit has some concerns. Again, she's double buster, double arts here. She has gut status for 1 time 3 turns, debuff immunity for 1 time 3 turns, and critical stars every turn for 3 turns, up to 10. Not a bad skill right there for survivability. She has arts and buster performance for 3 turns by 30%, kind of what you expect when you've got a 3-turn steroid. So, and she manages to have 2 of them at that. And then she increases her own damage against dragon enemies for 3 turns by 50%. So a nice 50% anti-dragon power mod. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's Siegfried out there. There's Sigurd out there. So there's already a ton of people that like just really work well against dragons. So why did we need Dobrynya? And we didn't. And I think that is one of the concerns with her, is that yes, those other units do exist, so why go with Dobrynya over them? Well, the proof is in the third skill really here, and that's where it charges her own gauge by 20%, increases the party's critical damage for 3 turns by 30%, and then increases the party's damage against dragon enemies for 3 turns by 30%. So Dobrynya has 2 anti-dragon power mods. She herself will deal 80% extra power mod damage to dragons. The rest of the party will deal 30%. That is the reason that they tried to differentiate her. This is where they want you to pay attention and look. It's because she provides the entire party the ability to deal more damage against dragon enemies. Now, this could be used where Dobrynya takes out an earlier wave and then buffs somebody else who's going to go up against the dragon. That could absolutely help out and be really nice. But at the end of the day, I think the big issue with that is getting Dobrynya to actually have enough charge to take the wave. What do I mean? I mean, she only ends up having 20% charge. So she's a unit that, yes, you can 3-turn with her, but it's going to be a double Oberon type setup. It's not going to be a good setup. Whereas if this charge skill were even 30% charge, you'd be able to use her in a double Koyanskaya setup. You'd be able to use her way more effectively that way, and she would have the potential capability of double stacking these power mods. And that's what I think they wanted to prevent. They did not want this going way too strong. So this is my concern with Dobrynya. Doesn't really have enough charge to be as effective as she could be because the devs are afraid of her. Again, I don't think it would be too broken even if they allowed the double up. We have Sumanai nowadays that can double up, so Siegfried being able to do it is just already cracked. So her NP does ignore defense and again can inflict burn, so something like, you know, Honey Lake could also be good on her in that regard, but again, the charge is always going to be the concern with her, and so I think that's something that I would really love to see get addressed for Dobrynya, because her damage is very middling, especially outside of the dragon niche. So I think she kind of deserves that little extra bit of charge to help out her capability. So again, if you really like her, go for her, but she is a permanent unit just like Taigong Wang, so she may spook you at some point anyways. Just to really quickly show you, the Trom pre-release campaign here did include the summoning campaign that we just talked about. It has some special quests basically in it as well, but this is all just gearing up essentially for Trom that's going to end up showing up here in the next month. You get the Advanced Quest Part 5, so already, even though this is a new concept, they at this point have released 5 of these things in the year by May, so you've pretty much gotten 1 a month. Then we get to June, and June's got the Trom chapter release. I'm not going to spoil you on this at all, but again, it is going to require you to have basically completed the Tunguska prologue and epilogue, so keep in mind that not only do you have to have LB6 done, but you also have to have done Tunguska. This does mean, though, that you don't necessarily have to have done the meat of Tunguska. You just have to have done the prologue and the epilogue of Tunguska, so again, remember, for those of you guys that don't have Tunguska completely available, this will not be as huge of a concern. But you will have time beforehand in the dead time there to actually do it, so it shouldn't be that hard if you guys need to get caught up. Again, though, there will be a summoning campaign here for Trom. And 3 of them, in fact. Your first one here is going to be Charlemagne. So talking about him, Charlemagne is a fantastic unit. For those of you guys that have had the opportunity to roll and use Okitan Summer, aka Okitan Saber, she is a very good AoE Black Grail quick looping saber. That is entirely what Charlemagne is as well. He is very similar to her. His kit is a little bit more convoluted, but it's largely very similar. He has hard survival just like she does. He has charge just like she does, and you're going to kind of see how. He grants 1 ally invincibility for 2 attacks, 3 turns. If Self doesn't have invincibility, it will increase his own NP gen rate for 5 turns. So you don't want to target this on himself if you're just trying to loop and farm with him. But again, it also is going to grant a self buff on defense buff for 5 turns, so that he grants himself the heroic king buff for 5 turns whenever he takes an attack. That enables extra damage from his NP. So in a challenge environment, if he gets hit, he gets more damage. In a 3-turn farm, he's not getting more damage from this because he's not getting hit. At least, I hope not, because at that point, it's not a 3-turn anymore. So, again, if he has invincibility, though, it has a 500% chance to seal his own NP for 1 turn as a demerit. So, be really careful with that skill. This is why I said, like, he's kind of a little bit more convoluted. You have to know what you're doing here so that you don't mess up. But as long as you do, it gets pretty muscle memory brain dead, so it's pretty easy. His second skill increases party attack and then increases his own damage against demonic and divine units, just like Taigong Wang. Kind of like they were somewhat stale in their design, but I digress. It's also a 30% charge skill here, so he gets some nice increases there. And this is where, to me, he deals a little bit less damage than Oki-tan on average, but he's got better niches than her that are going to be coming into play quite a bit. So again, at that point, if you like Charlemagne, go for him over her. It's not the end of the world if you have Oki-tan either. She's still really good. He can also increase his quick performance for 3 turns and increase his own critical damage against the evil alignment enemies, which is oddly specific. So again, if it's evil, you get more crit damage. If it's not, oh well. And if it is evil, but you still don't crit, oh well. So it's an interesting thing. But again, he does have that all in his kit. His NP is a 12-hit AoE quick NP, so it does a lot of hits. Unfortunately, it's quick, so that does temper it some in terms of its NP gain. He deals damage to all enemies and then deals super effective damage depending on the amount of heroic king stacks, which he only gets when he himself gets hit, if you remember. And then he reduces all enemies quick resistance for 3 turns. I think Charlemagne has a little bit more makings as a challenge unit, but still he can absolutely be used for farming. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Again, it's just the way his kit is kind of slanted, but still, he's absolutely capable of being a 3-turning unit, and he is really good in that capacity. Next up here, we have Kriemhild. Now, Kriemhild is a story-locked unit that a lot of people really liked, and a lot of people are going to try to go for. You can feel free to roll for her here if you want, but now into the future, we do know that she does have some different rate ups for you guys to pick and choose from. So again, I highly recommend you check each of those out before making your decision as to which one you want to roll on if you do want her. But again, Kriemhild is a single target arts berserker, and she's pretty good at that. She's not going to be Vlad, where she's just going to be refunding back to full and stuff like that, but she does have 50% charge, and that does help her out quite a bit. She has a drain for all enemies, the ability to reduce their defense and critical attack chance. She's got an Arts and Buster up for 3 turns that also increases her damage against chaotic alignment enemies by 50%. A really nice 50% power mod there. And that is going to be one of her niche uses. Whenever you've got a chaotic enemy, go with Kriemhild. She will do some work for you. Her third skill is also going to have a chance to draw all enemies to herself, a nice just taunt there, and then the 50% charge that we talked about with a 3000 heal. I actually really like this, other than the fact that the heal is tied to the taunt, because odds are you need the heal after you taunted. But still, I digress a little bit too much. Having the heal is always going to be somewhat useful for a berserker because they're squishy, so having anything to help combat the less than 10k HP and it getting chipped away at is probably a good thing, regardless of what skill that it's on. And then her NP ends up being a 4-hit single target NP that removes one enemy's defensive buffs activating first. So, again, this is going to be a nice way to carve enemies up. They're not going to be able to stop you. No amount of invuln or anything will. And so as a result, you should have the capability, basically, of being able to just, cut up the enemies. She's then going to deal 150% extra damage, super effective damage, to dragon enemies. So, chaotic, dragon, that's her niche. If you manage to find a parity of both, oh boy, I pity that enemy. So again, Kriemhild can be really good there. She's also going to reduce their arts resistance for 3 turns by 20%. So again, really, really solid. I think the only concerns that I have with Kriemhild are her overall survivability and really the lack of refund off the back of her NP. As long as you get the arts cards, you'll go places, but without that, don't expect a full loop. Make sure you bring enough charge to be able to brute force her in that 3 turn. And then next up here is Roland, who is our permanent unit. Roland is a really interesting one. He's the naked guy that you've heard about in Astolfo stories all this time, and he's basically best friends with Astolfo. Roland ends up being a decent single target Buster Saber here. He basically ends up having invuln pierce, so he's pretty difficult to stop. But he is a newer unit, so not a lot of people either rolled a lot for him or have him. But if you did roll the Kriemhild banner, odds are you got a ton of Roland and you cursed him because he kept replacing your Kriemhild. So there is that, but again, it just depends. And that's why I think some people will probably look for a different banner to roll Kriemhild on, and it's just totally up to them. But he's not a bad unit, so please don't take that the wrong way. He has self-invincibility for 1 turn, defense up for 1 turn of 100%. Remember some of my arguments in the past about how, like, you know, we talked about John and how she only had 5% defense on her NP? You've got now several units coming out this year that have 100% defense for a turn. So, like, yeah, I don't think buffing John's defense would be the most OP thing in the world. Again, he charges his own NP gauge by 20% here. Obviously, I wish it were 30, but it is what it is. Don't worry about it. You'll see. He increases his own Buster performance for 3 turns and then removes his own debuffs, but he has a 500% chance to reduce his own charm resistance as a demerit. But then he also removes all enemies' buffs. The other little remembered aspect to him is that fact. So again, he can basically be a buff stripper as a Saber, which is kind of nice because there are some really annoying Lancers that have dodge and you name it out there. So he's got the invuln pierce, he's got the buff removal, so you are not stopping Roland from killing you. His third skill is critical stars, basically star absorption, and then there it is, the other 10% he was missing on the first skill to bring him to 30%. His chance to deal 500 damage to himself without killing himself is not great, but hey, you can't have everything, and they definitely made his skill strong, so I'm a-okay with that. So again, I do think Roland is a very interesting unit. If you want to go for him as a single target Saber, he can be strong, but it's just up to you. That being said, if you roll this banner, he will spook you just because also Charlemagne's here, and you'll be like, oh my god, I got a Saber, and then instead Roland showed up, so just understand, if you do get Roland, he's not bad. We do have some decent CEs that become available here. They're not on rate up, but they are available for the first time. And that's the average one here, which is all attack scaling. It's Buster performance of at minimum 15%, but up to 20%. And then overcharge of 2 stages 1 time. It's actually not a bad CE for somebody that has a really nice damage dealing overcharge effect. So definitely really good, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to like that CE art. Again, we've got basically new versions of projection and so on and whatnot here. New versions of, as chat likes to call it, be catigant, be elegant. This is a CE that spooks me all the time on either server, so it is what it is. But again, there are some interesting things there, but nothing too much to talk about. Second banner is going to end up being Moriarty Ruler. Moriarty Ruler is really interesting. I remember when he first came out, a lot of people were just kind of down on him. There was this really weird comparison that had been going on at the time between a lot of the prior units that had come out. People just sitting there going like, oh, well, this unit isn't Space Ishtar. Oh, well, this unit isn't Melisande, yada, yada, yada. None of that matters. This unit is still a 3-turnable Black Grail looping AoE arts ruler, and it's wild to me to see people like denigrate that and basically say like, oh, well, I don't need this unit, they're not good. If you don't want to roll the unit, that's perfectly fine, but it does not mean Moriarty is a bad unit. He's absolutely great. So again, take a look at him. He's got 3 arts cards right there in his deck, something that at this point in time in the game is somewhat rare nowadays with new units. He's got 2 attack, 3 turn evasion, basically sure hit to counter an enemy's evasion. the ability to reduce all enemies' arts resist for 3 turns, and the arts resistance of enemies with evil alignment for 3 turns. His second skill here is a tricolor buff for 3 turns of 30% for all 3 of them, and then grants critical damage for 3 turns of 30%. And his third skill here charges his own NP gauge by 50%. This is how you know Moriarty's going to be able to pop off. 50% charge, like I said, it's a good indicator that the unit is very solid and going to have the ability to at minimum 3 turn, let alone 3 turn with a very good CE. And that's Moriarty for you. Again, some of the complaints that I saw leveled against him were the fact that he needs a third support to Black Grail loot, which is neither here nor there. There are plenty of units that need a support to 3 turn loot. I do not for the life of me understand why people kind of view that as a demerit, because most units do. It's very rare that units don't need the third support in order to Black Grail loot. But again, there are some that don't, and they are very good at what they do. But still, it is what it is. Usually you want the third support anyways for more damage, so especially for the more free-to-play oriented crowd, that's a good thing for you, not a bad thing. You're going to get the more firepower there, but it is what it is. He increases his own critical star absorption of arts and buster cards by 500%. Again, you can see the weight is 50-50 as to the effect there. And then gains critical stars of 20. So a very interesting unit, but again, you should probably also pay attention to this. He is Charm, Confusion, Terror, and Skill Seal immune. If you have an annoying challenge quest, Moriarty's your guy. He's not getting debilitated by any of these. So, again, I think they kind of knew that people needed some extra incentive here. But wait, there's more. He deals damage to all enemies with his 4-hit AoE Arts NP, deals super effective damage to enemies that are good alignment, seals their skills for 1 turn, and then makes them evil for 3 turns. To very quickly explain this, remember his first skill. He reduces the arts resistance of evil alignment enemies for 3 turns. His NP turns them evil. Here's the best part. If they were good, they still are good. He just imparts evil alignment on them, so at that point, they become both good and evil. And we can actually see this with a unit that exists currently in the game called Arjuna Alter, who has both effects on him as well. So, yeah, it's actually really, really nice to have that. Again, though, this does mean you're not going to get the beneficial effect of the first skill until you've already NP'd against that unit once. But it does at least give you that opening and will mean that he will get stronger in a 3-turn loop against the same set of enemies. So he's got that going for him. His overcharge effect is NP damage, which is going to scale really nice with Oberon as well. So again, I do think Moriarty is a fantastic AoE ruler. I do think, though, that a lot of people are going to start looking towards Melisande in the future, so I'd be remiss if I didn't bring that up, because Melisande Ruler does have AoE arts now. And so as a result, I think some people, just due to favoritism, are going to end up going after her. That's perfectly fine, but don't feel bad if you like Moriarty. He is absolutely stellar, and he can hold his own against a lot of these other units. So I do think he is still a decent option for people. And then we end up with Don Quixote, another story-locked unit. So Don Quixote is a really weird one. I think there's some interesting stuff that we can do with him, but he is basically a quick single-target Lancer here. So he deals damage to one enemy, he deals super effective damage to giant enemies, he deals damage to himself, he increases the party's attack by 20%, and he increases the party's critical chance by 20%. His first skill is Quick and Buster performance, as well as a Gut skill, but the Quick and Buster are only 20%. The good news is it's 80% of his deck is what this covers, and his hit counts here are not bad, particularly on the Quick cards. His second skill increases his own attack for 3 turns, charges his own gauge every turn for 3 turns by 10%, and gains himself critical stars every single turn for 3 turns. This is where Don Quixote gets weird. His third skill can only be used when he has 30% gauge or higher, and it has a 500% chance to reduce his NP gauge to 0. but it will charge the party's NP gauge except for himself by 30%. Don Quixote can act as a party transfer unit. A couple ways you can think about this. He could either just come in and use his skills to basically end up buffing, well, rather not buffing, but really getting crit stars, right? And then basically end up transferring his charge over to other people. That's certainly possible. You think about this in like a lotto comp where everyone might be running around with 50% charge Cs, and that could work. Or you can try to NP with Don Quixote and get 30% charge on the back end. Then transfer the rest of the NP to other people to help them handle the other waves. That is theoretically possible. The reason that I say it's theoretically possible is because NP gain not easy to allow that for. So you have to be a little bit careful with that, but it may be possible in certain circumstances where you could get overflow charge and maybe save his charge skill for after his NP. So again, there are ways to potentially do this, but that is something to keep in mind, that Don Quixote's got a weird kit, but it could be really situationally useful as a kit goes. Regardless, I think a lot of people are going to roll for it just because they like the design of the unit. I've seen a lot of like, just really good opinions on Don Quixote overall. So I do like him as a unit myself. I think he's pretty interesting. And then we have our newest 3-star here, Zhang Jue. I probably butchered that. My apologies to my Chinese friends that are out there, but I've never been good with Chinese names. Zhang, or the yellow turban guy as I like to call him, basically ends up having a party-wide Quicken Arts performance for 3 turns. He ends up basically having a cleanse and then critical buffs here. And then his third skill is the real attraction for him. It is a 50% charge skill for himself that has an 80% chance to impart different battlefield effects on your battlefield. So for 3 turns. So he can give forest, waterside, sunlight, or burning battlefields. Of all of them, there is no one else in the game at the current moment that can change it to forest. So this is really nice that he has this. Certainly, I would have liked to have seen some other ones, like maybe city or something like that. But a lot of this it's the 4 elements is what he's doing. And I do see that they did that, and it's an interesting thing. I have not really used this too effectively myself, but it is possible that you could, charge him up, have him handle a wave, but have him set the battlefield there so that somebody else, like say Barghest, who can't bring the sun herself, could potentially pop off. Again, you would have the ability to maybe impart him with something like 20% buff success chance. That would make all of these land. And then you would have guaranteeable field effects. But I think this is the one way that they kept him in line and kind of neutered him, was making it so that each of these has a chance to fail. So yes, it is theoretically possible to get none of them. But we all know the reality here. The one you won't get will be the only one that you needed. Because that's just the way this game works sometimes. Still, his NP is 5-hit, it's AoE quick. It has the ability to reduce the enemy's quick resistance by 20% on forest battlefield, arts resistance on water side, buster resistance on sunlight, and critical attack chance on burning. Then it deals damage. Then his NP will also increase his NP damage, activating first with the overcharge effect. So again, he's rather interesting as far as 3 stars go. He is permanent. You will be able to roll more copies of him. Just remember at this point, if you want to get his mana loading, you need to save up the coins and stuff for that. So keep that in mind, that you don't just want to immediately burn his coins the second you get him in Grail casting and stuff like that. And then we get to the third banner here, which is the return of Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock is a very interesting unit. I get asked about him all the time. Sherlock has never been meta, ever, okay? So when we start complaining about, Moriarty and saying oh, he's not as powerful as so-and-so, it doesn't really matter, because you've got the same thing here with Sherlock Holmes. Why do you want to use Sherlock Holmes? Well, because Sherlock Holmes is one of the only units in the game that can confer invincibility pierce and ignore defense to the entire party. Sherlock is an enabler. Sherlock is an offensive support. Sherlock is a crit fiend a little bit as well, because you can see he also increases the party's critical damage by 50% for 3 turns. So, irregardless of the rest of Sherlock's kit, which is not bad, and he does have some nice buffs at this point, including a 50% charge skill. At the end of the day, the reason you're going to use Sherlock is you really like crit support, you really need invuln pierce or defense pierce, and you're in a challenge environment. Sherlock is a really fun unit to use. He's actually great as a solo unit in some capacities, but he is going to be the enabler for the rest of your party for the majority of the time. Do you have to have him? No, but he is still very good as far as that offensive support goes. So again, he is an interesting and fun unit to use, and there are some esports variants of him as well, due to the way that his first skill can work, given the fact that it grants Arts Resist down for all enemies. Next up, we have Sumanai, aka Siegfried. The reason a lot of us call him Sumanai, if you're ever curious, is because when he's originally summoned, the line that he says is Sumanai, aka sorry. And the reason basically a lot of people got upset about this and nicknamed him this is because they kept getting spooked by him on banners that they were trying to roll other units on. This happened quite a bit in early FGO, and so the name has stuck ever since, but Siegfried is not a bad unit. In fact, if you think that he's bad because of the nickname, please understand, he's been good for years now, so I don't know why people still think this way about him. Sumanai is very serviceable as far as permanent AoE buster sabers go. He got an upgrade to his first skill that makes it 30% charge. This means he can work in a double Koyanskaya system. He also ends up having attack up of 30% there, so he gets to double that up. His second skill is his weakest skill, and it's still pretty decent. It's a cleanse and a heal on a 5-turn cooldown. And his third skill is Dragon Slayer that gives damage and defense against dragons for 3 turns. And basically the damage is an 80% power mod. But it's also on a 5-turn cooldown, so when they upgraded it to give it also 50% buster up for 1 turn, yeah, you can get this in back-to-back turns. This means you can basically pop this on turn 2 and turn 3, having 50% buster up on each of those turns. But wait, there's more. Because you also get to double up the 3 turns of 80% anti-dragon damage. Meaning you're just rolling around by turn 3 with 160% power mod against dragons. But wait, there's more. So then we get to his NP, which has had its NP interlude and deals extra damage to enemies, increases his own NP generation rate after the fact, and then, oh, what's that? You thought power mods were too much? Well, now we've added 150% super effective modifier to dragon enemies. The issue is not that Sigurd doesn't deal enough damage with his NP. The issue is that Sumanai is just disgustingly broken against dragons. I have taken Sumanai into neutral damage against, like, wyverns, and watched him calmly, coolly deal 6 million neutral damage. It's a thing. So, yes, if it's not a dragon enemy you're facing, Sumanai still has some decent firepower, but he might struggle. But if it is a dragon you're facing, the dragon is dead. Especially if you set him up for success. Please understand that. That is so much modifiers for dragon. So yeah, Sumanai is absolutely fantastic. If he's like one of your only AoE sabers, I highly recommend investing in him. It will pay off, if not immediately, at some point for you. And again, all the same CEs right there. So that is the RATJAM release in a nutshell. Let me see here real quick. So this is just the other campaigns that they had. We do end up getting the charge upgrade for Sherlock here, as well as the charge upgrade for Sumanai here. So this is where, again, Sumanai is just really, at this point, going to become disgusting. Then we end up with the 2500 days anniversary. This is just going to end up being some nice courts for you. Nothing more for that. But we also end up then at that point rolling ourselves into the Holy Grail Moonsault operation. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring some of this up, but we're now getting close to anniversary, so it is possible that you can see some schedule churn at this point. The Moonsault operation has no new units in it, so this is a event that could move around potentially, but we'll see. Again, I'm not sure they necessarily have to move this one, especially given that you have Hakenden. But Hakenden at minimum must move, and the reason for this is because NA's anniversary will be somewhere from July 4th to the 7th on NA. I'm expecting it probably the 5th through the 7th, because the 5th is Friday, and basically the 7th would end up being the final day of Anime Expo. That is what always determines the date of our anniversary, because the devs always go to Anime Expo and celebrate with a panel there. So that's probably what's going to dictate it again this year. As a result, though, you can see the Hakenden event would easily overlap with that, and because Bakin is here and she is a new unit, it must move forward or it will make the devs liars. And what do I mean by that? Back in year 1 on NA, we had the issue where the devs messed up one of our GSSRs. I explained this actually at the start of the banner review videos, but again, it is a thing where the devs had to come out and say, okay, yep, we messed up. We're not ever going to mess with a GSSR on NA ever again. And so in order to do that, any unit that would appear on the GSSR must come out before the GSSR, which is Bakin. Bakin here is going to have to move downward, aka forward in time on the schedule, so that she can kind of get out of the way of this. The easy thing to punt is obviously going to be stuff like Road to 7 and the Moonsault operation, as neither of them have new units, so they can just kind of flip-flop, and thus there's not too much churn there. So that's kind of why I'm mentioning this now as we get to Moonsault. Okay, so again, you guys can see there basically is, and don't pay attention to this. This is nothing. I understand why it's there, but Moonsault is going to be your next Grail front. Just a bit of a TLDR about it. Like, this is where the devs went unhinged on Grail fronts, and what I mean when I say that is they probably went a little bit too robust. A lot of the Grail fronts in this one take upwards of half an hour to complete. So be very careful with that, as they kind of got in that same old, like crazy challenge quest mentality with this sort of thing. They're not actually as difficult as they're made out to be. They're pretty easy if you have a developed enough Chaldea. It's just going to require you to use kind of your best units and to try and, like, you know, be able to funnel enemies down paths, because they're absolutely going to outnumber you in these things. And the hardest thing will be preventing the enemies from basically unaliving themselves on you before you collect all the loot. So you have to be a little bit careful. There are a couple where you need to, like, kite the unit in order to be able to get to the treasure before they unalive themselves. But at the end of the day, it's really not that hard or that difficult. It just takes a long time to do some of these. So that was my criticism of these. I otherwise really like Grail fronts, so I just hope that they keep Grail fronts in a, like, more time manageable format in the future. But again, the only requirement here is that you clear Solomon for this one, and we do end up having a summoning campaign for, you name it, Jinako. We've already talked about Jinako, so I'm not gonna, spend the time on her again. There are no raid-up CEs because this is not an actual event. It's just a Grail front campaign. So keep that in mind that, this is what we like to call an unofficial K-Scope raid-up. Or if you will, nowadays, an unofficial Black Grail raid-up. The whole point is, they're never actually on raid-up, but theoretically you have a better chance of success when there are no raid-up CEs to compete with the permanent pool CEs. It's really not that big of a difference, and it's still really low odds, so that's where the meme comes from of calling it that. But yes, there are no raid-up CEs on this, so potentially you could get any of the other permanent CEs that are out there. And then your second banner here is going to be the return of Summer BB. Now, I have not talked about Summer BB with you guys yet, so I at least get to do that. So Summer BB is a really interesting one. Obviously, we live in the Koyanskaya era, and so cooldown reduction is a thing, especially for our Buster units. And Summer BB has some issues with that. As you can see, she does get the upgrade to her first skill that increases her own critical damage, her critical star absorption for 3 turns, her attack for 3 turns, and then gives her a on attack activate buff that gains her 20 critical stars whenever she uses her own extra attack. It's a really, really nice effect, but it does require you to kind of be locking in her own cards in order to gain the benefit of this, or for her to be in a solo environment. Her second skill, though, is where her issue kind of lies, and it's a 50% charge skill, recovers her own HP by 3,000, gives her Buster up of 20% for 3 turns, gives her NP damage of 50% for 3 turns, and grants her 1 attack, 3 turns evasion. So it's a huge skill for the laundry list of effects that it has. It's incredibly strong. And because of that, the devs decided to put it on a 7-turn cooldown, which means Double Koyanskaya can't solve this on its own. You need another source of cooldown reduction if you want to be able to use this skill twice within a 3-turn sequence. So that is the issue that Summer BB always has. You could use something like Atlas, but then the issue becomes you don't really have enough charge at that point. So you kind of need the third sport in order to have enough charge for her. So my recommendation is just kind of resigning yourself to not being able to double pop this and just taking the best sports you can alongside her for it, if you're going that route. But the real reason to use Summer BB, as a lot of people would denote, would be this third skill, Faceless Moon EX. What this skill does, it locks a set of command cards for 3 turns, meaning it will give you the same cards throughout the duration of that 3-turn sequence. So if you had, like, I don't know, one unit's like triple Buster Chain, you could lock that in and get that for all 3 turns. So it's really strong, really powerful when you get the cards that you actually want to lock in. This is the issue with this skill, is that it is RNG dependent. You need to have a good series of cards to lock in. What a good series of cards is depends entirely on your goal. For instance, getting triple Buster would be terrible if all you wanted was arts to be able to get back to an NP. So you have to be careful about how you lock the cards and what you're after. So keep sure that you have a good goal in mind and do that then, and you'll absolutely be rewarded. But if you're not paying attention, you lock the wrong cards, you're going to end up regretting it. Also, command cards do not get reshuffled when the skill is activated, so it just is what it is. The effect, however, is removed if you rotate the party in any way, or kill someone, or get someone, sorry, not kill someone, or if you get someone killed in your party. That's the issue at play. So if a party member is defeated, card skill breaks. It will not continue to lock cards at that point. So it will gain critical stars every turn for 3 turns as well. This also means that you get pretty easy crits, especially in conjunction with her first skill that has the crit damage and crit absorption on it. So again, Summer BB actually has a really nice kit. The big thing also that I think a lot of people overlook is the fact that she has an AoE Buster NP that will drain all enemies' NPs by 1. So she is an AoE drainer, and that does have some niche uses in challenge environments. She also has the ability to potentially overcharge and reduce their NP gauge by an additional 1, so you could drain them up to 2 times. This is one of the worst overcharge effects in the game, though. The reason why is because, 1, you don't want to have to rely on it, and 2, it's only a 10% chance at base overcharge rank. That is not going to happen. Do not bet on this. I know some of y'all may be lucky, but again, if it happens, it happens. Try to take advantage of it, but just do not assume that it will happen because it is such a low chance. So again, the big reason I think to use Summer BB is Faceless Moon. She's really nice for card lock memes. There are some units that can really benefit from that you would otherwise maybe need to solo with, you know, a unit like, say, Super Orion, you can do some really strong stuff without having to, like, put him in a solo environment. But again, you have to be a little bit careful with kind of how you handle her, and especially watch out for party rotating and, you know, someone dying, because not going to be to your benefit if you break the card lock that was the whole reason that you brought her for. So there is that. Again, that is your second banner there. Nothing too much else. You do have some strengthenings here. This is where basically a lot of the Sakura 5 end up getting their upgrades. So pretty nice in that regard. Definitely, you can see this is also where she got the crit modifier for her. But again, a lot of these are actually really stellar buffs. You can see this is Melt's charge skill as well. So definitely some really nice ones. We'll go over this when we go over all of the upgrades for the year. But again, really like this set of buffs. And that is the Moonsault front. We do have Road to 7 LB3 campaign here. These ones were, to me, not as annoying as the prior set, but it is what it is. There is a summoning campaign here that's going to include QSH and Li Shuen. Some of these we don't have to go over because we already did, but we will go over QSH as he is a limited unit. So QSH is, at this point, you know, we were talking about, ironically enough, Janako earlier, and how one of her kind of deals is that she has other units that can kind of do each thing that she does better. QSH is a little bit better at soloing than she is. And part of the reason is because he's just way more holistically focused on invulning himself, getting back to another NP, doing it again and again and again, and still being able to, like, fire off crits and heal himself and do all of that. So he's really self-sustaining. You just have to be careful, watch out for enemies that have buff strip and stuff on him, because he is a very good unit. He has the ability to reduce all enemies NP gauge. He has the ability to stun them, so he can delay their NP and such. Just be careful, because it's only a 70%. And then he also has the ability to charge himself and cleanse his own debuffs, which is really nice, on top of being able to heal. So a lot of this is going to come down to cooldown management and being able to use the stuff at the right time. But again, his NP is going to be your bread and butter. You're going to want to keep popping this over and over again, because it's just a absolute mitigator. It allows him to grant himself invincibility for one turn. He can draw the attention of all enemies to himself. So this also means that he potentially protects the party, though his invuln doesn't impact the party. So that's something you have to consider if you're up against AoE enemies. He can increase his own critical damage from there for 3 turns by, you know, again, scaling with his NP level, but a base of 50%. And then he increases his own critical star absorption, meaning that he's going to get more crit damage and then be able to crit hard with it because he soaked all the stars to himself. His overcharge effect will also increase the amount of attack that he does, basically, for 3 turns. So again, I've seen some really monster crits out of QSH, and that's why I think, like, for a solo challenge unit, he's actually really strong in certain scenarios. We already talked about Li Shuen, we already talked about Zhang Jue. Let's talk Consort Yu now, Zhang Yu's wife, if you will. Yume Ren, aka Consort Yu, here is a very interesting unit. I think a lot of people really like Consort Yu because of her design. She is not a bad unit. I'm dead serious. Like, I think a lot of people are still stuck in the original mindset with Consort Yu that she has the second lowest attack power of all 4 stars in the game. And it's arguably the lowest since she's an assassin. So there's that. But still, I do think the devs tried to limit her. I'm not okay with how they chose to implement somebody, because the lore surrounding Consort Yu indicates that she should be far stronger. But this game doesn't often make sense with some of its lore arguments versus how the unit is designed, so it is what it is. Chalk her up to just another casualty of that at that point. But again, let's go over her kit here so you can see why. She charges her own NP gauge every turn for 5 turns by 10%. She has self-debuff immunity for 1 turn. That's an important thing, so pay attention. Her second skill here just was originally the ability to recover her own HP for 5 turns, and including giving her buff removal resistance for just herself for 1 turn by up to 100%. You're going to want to lower this skill. Trust me. Her third skill is the ability to reduce one enemy's NP gauge by 1 turn, charging her own gauge by up to 27%. This is arguably one of the biggest slaps in the face in her entire kit. It's the fact that they just didn't give her 30%. One of the only vampires out there that has 30% is Vlad. Almost all the other vampires get stuck at some scuffed ass like 27, 28%. And it's just sad because this absolutely would be a better skill if it were just a flat even 30%, especially on a 6-turn cooldown. Still, have to take it in stride and say, hey, look, I've got this. I've got the 10% charge right there. So yeah, it's something, and it can add up to enough charge to allow her to be able to 3-turn. In fact, due to the upgrade that she gets, she's in a better position for this. So her NP first removes her own debuffs. Definitely nice. Then it removes her own buffs, which is definitely not nice. Then it deals damage that ignores defense and inflicts them with curse, and it will increase her own bust performance for 1 turn activating first. Here's the problem with this. This is evil. This absolutely hurts Yume Rin. The thing is, you have a way around it. And that's why I told you to level the second skill to 10. Because that 100% buff removal resistance will stop this. At least once. From there, it gets a little bit kind of difficult to maintain, but hey, you at least have that there. The devs realized that they made her way too freaking weak and convoluted, so they came back and they upgraded her second skill. Now, the buff removal resistance is 3 turns, so that you don't keep removing her buffs, because that was just asinine that they put that in there. And then it now also is a 30% attack up for 3 turns that they added. So I want to be clear here. They just added a 30% steroid to a unit out of nowhere. This may not seem that crazy since we just went over Sumanai earlier where he got a 50% steroid out of nowhere. Both of them are the exceptions to the rule. It is very rare to see them ever add more than 20% extra damage out of nowhere to a unit. So again, this is a testament that the devs fucked up with this unit. They know they did, and that's exactly why they had to come in and give a 30% attack buff. So this buff absolutely does change things for her. It makes her way more usable, and this is why I say Consort Yu is not a bad unit at this point. They do need to come in, I think, and take a look at some of her other skills still, but she is definitely way more usable than she used to be, making her not the trophy wife that a lot of people treated her as. Next up, we have Qin Liangyu. I am still not the biggest fan of Qin Liangyu. I do like her character. In fact, I love her character. I think she's great. That's probably one of the reasons that I want her to be a little bit better. Because at the end of the day, I feel like she's kind of a weaker Hozoin in a really weird way. And I think the problem kind of lies in how her kit is designed. So you can see she gets quick in arts performance for 3 turns, critical damage for 3 turns. That's kind of nice. I think the modifiers here could be stronger, but it is what it is. She gives herself debuff immunity for 3 times 3 turns, which is powerful, critical star absorption, and then buff removal resistance as well. So all of that is good. And then she also ends up having guts with basically charge for 20% here, which is nice. But I think the other issue at play is that the guts was only 1 HP. So they come back later and they say, you know what, you're right, this is crap, let's buff it. And so they made it 2 times with 1 HP over 5 turns. Honestly, that is better. So that is A-okay in my book, but definitely kind of weird. And then they definitely go like, yeah, you know what? The performance was not good, so let's make it 30% charge instead of 20. And then they also go, hey, here, gain critical stars every single turn for 5 turns up to 15. So they realized this unit needed a lot of help. I'm still not sure she's in the best of situations, but it is a lot better than it used to be thanks to that buff. To make a long story short here, Qin Liangyu grants herself relatively a couple of effects here with her NP. It's a support-based NP, where basically whenever she attacks 3 times for 5 turns, she inflicts defense down. She will also remove an enemy's buffs whenever she critical attacks. And then whenever she is hit for 3 times 5 turns, she will inflict crit damage down to the enemy and then increase her own attack by level of how many NP levels you have. The overcharge effect will also grant an on defense effect for 3 times 5 turns that recovers the party's HP whenever she takes a critical attack by 2,000. She needs an NP interlude because this is not enough. 1, it sucks because it's conditional to only crits. 2, if you get crit, 2,000 HP is not enough. That's not gonna help offset it enough. Most of those crits happening to you are gonna end up being in the like 5k plus range, up to potentially one-shotting her. So yeah, no, they absolutely needed to make this stronger as far as I'm concerned. It either needs to affect all attacks and not just crits, or it needs to heal for way more if it's just going to be crits. So again, I think Qin Liangyu has some issues with actual survivability and sustain down the stretch. Did get a nice buff to help that, but yeah, no, she still needs more. And I think that is her biggest issue over time. Lanling Wang, on the other hand, he's another permanent unit here, but Prince of Lanling, as we like to call him, really has a good kit, and the majority of why you're going to use him is he is a sort of offensive support that can also increase buff success rate by 40% for 1 turn. So really good if you've got an arts unit that is having issues kind of securing their skills. Particularly someone like, say, Umu, who maybe has Imperial Privilege, that could fail. So that's a really nice example of some synergy between these 2 units. So I do think there is some nice uses for Lanling over time. He also gives the party arts up. Again, you already saw he can charge an ally's gauge and give them buff success chance, and he can grant himself invincibility and increase the party's attack. His NP will also drain enemies, reduce their critical attack chance, and reduce the party's taken by measure of, again, how many MP levels he has. Honestly, this is one of the weaker scaling ones as far as I'm concerned. He could probably use an NP interlude himself. But he further increases the party's attack with this overcharge, which is nice. So again, I don't think Lanling's a bad unit, at least from a like 4-star kind of niche support capacity. Jing Ke is up here, and Jing Ke does get a nice upgrade to her 2nd skill that basically gives her the king niche here. It's also going to make it for 5 times over the next 3 turns that whenever she attacks, she inflicts defense down when she uses a quick card, and also increases her own critical star generation rate. So really a solid buff for Jing Ke. She still has the quick up for 1 turn and crit damage. She still has the gain or the ability to gain crit stars and soak them to herself. So not a bad kit. I think that upgrade was necessary because she needed some more firepower, but it really did help. She has had an NP interlude that increases her damage and then also allows her to gain critical stars now. So definitely a lot nicer, but remember, it is still ultimately an instant kill type of effect, but thankfully this will happen after damage goes out, so there is that. But still, I do think it is quite the interesting upgrade to Jing Ke, and I do think that she's in a much better place thanks to that. Red Hair, I'm just going to be honest with you and say that Red Hair absolutely needs an upgrade, and his performance is a travesty at this point. He is a story-locked 3-star unit. He's very rare in that regard, but yeah, no, his damage still is not that good. He's got 3 attacks, 5 turns quick up. He ends up basically having invincibility, pierce, and evasion for himself, which is nice. And his 3rd skill is critical damage for 3 attacks, 5 turns, and his own attack for 3 attacks, 5 turns. His NP is just an AoE NP that ignores defense buffs and has a chance to skill seal. So the only real reason that you're going to use him is for the ignore defense and the invincibility pierce. Nothing else, because he doesn't have charge. He doesn't really have that much offensive firepower either. So to me, Red Hair is pretty lackluster in terms of his performance, and you're better off with just about every other AoE rider that you could get your hands on. But it really does depend on how many copies of Red Hair you have and what situation you find yourself in. Again, you can see the rotational rate ups here at play. So ironically enough, and I think this is kind of the dick move, they didn't put Consort Yu with her husband. They ended up instead putting Qin Liangyu there, and I don't know why. They put her instead with QSH, and it is what it is, and you have Old Man Li with Prince of Lanling there for the remainder. You do have the capability here as well of getting the 4-star CE that was available at the end of LB3. It is available in the story pool otherwise, but I don't recommend rolling there. So if you just want to collect, MLB of it for collection's sake, this would be a decent time to roll. But it is what it is ultimately. And again, this is Road to 7 in a nutshell. Then we get to Advanced Quest Part 6. There's nothing there. And now we have Hakenden, which, like I said, should become before our anniversary. Now, Hakenden is very similar to the Bunyan event in the fact that it also has sort of repeatably farmable quests where you can keep getting rewards. You're going to keep sending the dogs out, basically. They're going to go retrieve materials for you. It's totally free. You just want to keep them rolling as much as possible and get that. But that does mean that, it's difficult to be able to farm out more in that regard. In fact, there will be an event later in the year that's more like the Bunyan event, but this is a nice way that they did allow you to get some additional resources and to be able to pick and choose which resources you wanted. But we'll talk about that when we actually get to doing an event review for it. It does require you having to clear LB3 for this, so keep that in mind for those of you guys that have fallen behind on story. So let's talk about the actual summoning campaign. But first up, you can see that Lobo and Izo gets his NP interlude here, and it's really good for him. So again, you're going to see Izo also gets his costume here. This one's pretty nice. So we'll go ahead and talk about the summoning campaigns in Hakenden. So first off, you have Bakin, and Bakin is another AoE arts rider, but don't confuse her with some of the other arts riders because she stands out in a couple of ways of her own. She charges her own NP gauge by 30%, charges the party's NP gauge except for herself by 10%, and then basically gains critical stars. So she does have a little bit of support capacity there. And then her second skill here is a targetable effect that increases one ally's quick, arts, and buster performance for 3 turns by 20%, increases their critical damage for 3 turns by 20%, increases their NP damage for 3 turns by 20%, recovers their HP by up to 1,000, grants them 1 attack evasion for 3 turns, and then grants them a debuff immunity 1 time for 3 turns. Anyone agree with me that skill effects are getting too long? This is kind of a classic example of that, as this is a veritable laundry list of effects, but all targetable, it's all good, so it's really, really nice in that capacity. Yeah, all on a 6-turn cooldown still, so. Her third skill here is Absorbed in Writing. It's going to increase her arts performance for 3 turns on top of everything else that she had already in her kit. So again, you do end up getting the 50% arts up if you target her second skill on herself like you should. And then she also grants an on-attack activate buff that increases the party's attack by 5% whenever she uses an arts card for 3 turns. So really a decent skill there. Her NP increases her own damage against demonic enemies for 3 turns, which is very nice. And then it's also going to activate first, which is just a nice power mod. It deals damage to all enemies. It gains 8 crit stars on an arts unit, which is good. And then it deals extra damage to enemies that are evil alignment. Super effective at that. So she's got a super effective niche. She's got demonic as a power mod. Actually really good. Again, demonic is a super wide niche. It's got a ton of stuff that you're going to be killing that will fall under this, especially, caster units. So this is very good for her to have. And then the fact that she's super effective against evil is going to make her really effective against certain types of servants in particular, since they're mostly the only ones that have alignments. But hey, this is really, really solid as far as kit goes. Now, I think the obvious issue that you're going to have is how does she stack up compared to, other free units like Habitrot? But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, do you want another unit that can really excel in a niche? Do you really like Bakin? If you already have other units that are adequate, you do absolutely not have to roll. But again, she does bear worth consideration due to these niches at play and how effective she can be. Her refund is relatively good as well, so again, you should be able to use her with very powerful CEs. Next up, we have Hessian Lobo, and you guys saw he does get the upgrade basically to his first skill here. His monstrous strength goes from 2 turns of attack to now 3 turns, and also gives him a sort of power mod against man attribute. Definitely something that's covered a lot by Buster units and Buster supports now, but really, it's nice that Hessian Lobo has another way to stand out, because he's been a unit that I think for a long time a lot of people just looked down on and didn't really want to use. So giving him some upgrades, I think he was well deserving of that at this point. Again, just really quick, his first skill is defense up for himself and critical star absorption. His third skill is instant kill resistance reduction, which is really good for him since his NP does instant kill, and reduces their attack for 1 turn, as well as removing their buff. So this is really nice because it means you're not going to stop him yet again. He is going to do a lot of damage with that. Also, his NP is an 8-hit single target NP. It has had its NP interlude, so he ignores evasion, increases critical attack damage by 20% for 3 turns, and then deals damage to 1 enemy with a chance to instant kill them, being a base rate of 60. So again, be careful. You're not going to be able to death proc probably against, you know, like servant type enemies or gold enemies, but yeah, you'd have chances against bronze and silver enemies. And at the end of the day, even if you're not going for the death proc, the upgrades to his damage capability there do help out his usability. Be careful though, refund, not that good. It's an 8-hit quick NP, so that is kind of the issue at play. But certainly if you're taking enough charge into the party, you absolutely could manage to 3-turn over someone, especially with some decent card luck. So I do think Lobo is in a much better state than he used to be. Still not going to be really hanging with Tyra and Jalter at this point, but he is definitely a serviceable sort of backup option, or again, primary option if you don't have either of those two. And then we have the Manslayer Izo. Again, Izo is honestly, he is a limited 3-star, so he's difficult to get your hands on. It's also going to mean that some people are going to want to roll here for coins for him due to the issue at play with coins availability. That being said, I do recommend Izo for a 3-star single target assassin. The fact that he has a 100% power mod against humanoid enemies, which is basically every servant in the game, and quite a few enemies on top of that, is just really strong. This is often compared to Sanson that has anti-human damage, and it's not nearly as good. So the fact that Izo has humanoid damage is really a feather in his cap. Plus the 30% crit damage there. He still gets some hard survivability and even more crit damage right here. And then his third skill is the ability to soak the stars to him. So the biggest issue you're going to have is actually generating the stars. That being said, he has had an NP interlude at this point. He deals damage to 1 enemy on a 4-hit single target arts NP, but he will also increase his critical generation rate by 100% for 3 turns, activating first, which is really nice since he's going to need it as an arts unit. He then deals super effective damage to enemies that are man attribute, so another really crazy upgrade to an overcharge effect. Definitely a nice, solid upgrade for him. So again, I think Izo is very good for a 3-star. Just be careful, he doesn't have charge anywhere in his kit, so that is the sort of issue, is getting him to his NP. You do get some event CEs in this, and again, I will mention that I'm probably not going to go over the actual shop CEs here. All of those CEs are welfare, so they're not really in consideration for your banners. But I will probably put together another video talking about like the best welfare CEs for the year, again, to keep your eyes peeled for. So I did that last year. I'll probably do it again this year. Again, though, you got Mount Fuji Pilgrimage here is going to be your 5-star. This one, to me, not really that good. It could be potentially decent on a like support unit, but the split stats, I think, are really what kills it. It gives crit stars per turn, arts up, basically, and then overcharge 2 stages 1 time. So the first 2 effects will definitely last you down the stretch, but the overcharge is a one and done. And I think on a support unit, you want some type of capability to kind of keep doing what they're doing. So feel like the overcharge here is kind of a waste, and due to the split nature of the CE, I'm not really that ecstatic for it. So to me, this one's really not worth rolling for from a gameplay standpoint. If you want it because you just really like the cute Van Gogh art, go for it. That's absolutely fine. And then, yeah, nothing too much else to denote about the other event Cs there. Your second banner here is going to be Minamoto no Tametomo with your other 2 units again. Minamoto is very interesting in the fact that he is yet another AoE Buster Archer. The game is flooded with them at this point. I'm actually perplexed as to why they keep doing that, not like doing other card types, but it is what it is. So anyways, Minamoto is interesting. He's not a bad unit by any means, but again, the competition is so fierce in this that being not a bad unit means that a lot of people are probably not going to roll you because they already have their dogs in that fight, if you will. They've already have a clear chosen candidate that they want to go for. So I do think he's actually really interesting. Check out his NP animation. It's actually really cool. But again, that may change your mind on it, but otherwise it may not. So he does, stupidly enough, have 3 attacks, 3 turns Buster performance. To me, this is a weird limitation that should probably only be in play on a, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like a 3-star, a 4-star maybe even, but not a 5-star. I really don't want to see a 5-star steroid get limited in this capacity, especially since we have plenty of units that don't have this limitation, even though it is a 50% steroid. So there is that. So then we end up having the second skill here, and this is going to grant himself gut status for 1 time 3 turns, and then whenever his guts is activated, it'll increase his own NP damage by 20%, also removing his own debuffs and charging his gauge by 30% right there. So a really nice effect because you can just go ahead and use this for the charge. It's on a 6-turn cooldown, and having guts on a 6-turn cooldown is always powerful, but again, just having that additional effect there with the cleanse and the NP damage is really, really nice. So you could potentially Qin Gong him or something like that to have him pop back up and have him get the additional NP damage effect. But that may be not the best use of him. It just really depends on kind of what you're trying to do. His third skill here is 5 turns of sure hit, which is just crazy to me. And then grants himself regeneration buff every single turn that increases NP damage 1 time for 5 turns, every turn for 5 turns. So basically, he's just going to keep getting a stacking NP damage of up to 20% every single turn for 5 turns. So he's a unit that's going to scale scarily good with Oberon, and that's something I think a lot of people probably overlook. He also has the ability to charge his own gauge every single turn for 5 turns, but keep in mind this turn's on a 7-turn cooldown, so you're probably not getting back to it in a normal double coin Skya setup. And I think what they tried to do here is they tried to be like, oh look, we've given him 10% charge every single turn, so that in conjunction with his 30% charge makes him a 50% charger. And while that is true, that would only be true by the final turn of a 3-turn loop. So the 10% charge is kind of difficult to make use of. So at that point, just view him as a 30% charger. That is how he will function for the vast majority of people. Kind of like if you were trying to 3-turn with someone like Arjuna Alter or something like that. Very similar type of setup for Tametomo. But hey, having the extra capacity to charge over time is certainly not bad either. Again, you can see his NP is 4-hit AoE. It ignores invincibility for 1 turn and defense for 1 turn. So that's the feather in his cap, is that, again, he's not going to be really stoppable in any capacity. And then he increases his own Buster performance specifically on water side, oddly enough. Again, I know the lore of the character, so I get it. But like, it is a definitely like interesting thing to see this for a Buster unit, let alone the fact that he has no capacity to bring this himself. So he does have that. It's going to activate first. So if you're lucky enough, he's going to get even more damage there. And then he deals damage to all enemies. His overcharge effect deals super effective damage to enemies with the lawful alignment, another relatively rare niche. So that is a good thing for him, given the fact that it will allow him to stand out from several of his other sort of AoE archer counterparts, and there should be plenty of lawful sabers for him to kind of deal with. So again, I do think Minamoto no Tametomo is not a bad unit, but I do think he's kind of late to the game, if you will, where a lot of people already have a good AoE buster archer. So it's up to you if you decide to roll for him. Like I said, the NP animation's really cool, but again, it's your prerogative. Your third banner here will be Hokusai, and Hokusai is another interesting unit. I still remember when she came out on an A, all the people screaming about, you told us she could loop, why can't she loop? And clearly those people did not watch what I said about her, because I did warn that that was going to be the case at first until we got some more of those art support upgrades and stuff, because again, we had like Nero Bride needing to get her 30% charge. We had Paracelsus coming into his own, getting his NP gain skill. And then naturally down the line, you had Castoria, which was not at that time, obviously, out for an A. And so as a result, like, it was more of a going forward Hokusai would be able to loop, but a lot of people kind of overlooked that. Still, that does at least hold a partial truth in it even nowadays, and that's the fact that Hokusai's NP generation numbers are not that good, so be very careful with how you use her. That being said, she is one of the best looking NPs in the game, in my opinion, and she does end up having quite a bit of firepower if you use her correctly. So she does have the 30% charge and a hard evasion skill there. She does have arts up, buff removal resistance, and debuff resistance of 100% there for each of those. For basically the arts up for 3 turns, but the rest for 1 turn. And then Nom de Plume, which basically allows her to stack defense down whenever she uses arts cards, allowing you to use it either before her NP or after her NP, should you so choose. Normally, we would say that the use of this was to use before the NP to stack defense down to make the NP hit harder. But in recent years, she has gotten an upgrade, and that upgrade now changes the game because it's also going to increase the critical star absorption of the arts cards, making it basically a lot easier to crit with her arts cards, making you really want to follow up the NP with the arts cards, which would potentially be better for her, since that would allow her to refund back to full and be able to, you know, do it again. So that, I think, is the big consideration there. Obviously, this would potentially hurt landing the defense downs ahead of the NP, but if you're going up against the same enemy over and over again, it's all relative. You're just going to keep stacking that defense down and being able to crit and being able to get back to an NP. So it's only a problem if you're trying to 3-turn in a farming setup. Still a really, really decent upgrade for her there. You can see her NP is AoE 5 hit, deals damage to all enemies, and then has extra damage to enemies with the man attribute, and it's super effective at that. So this is where she's really going to want to try and stand out. Again, she does have some stiff competition now in the AoE foreigner category, so I do think that is something to pay attention to, but I do really like Hokusai at minimum for challenge content. I think she hits hard, I think she debuffs the crap out of enemies, and I think she has at least decent survivability since her cooldowns are pretty good. And again, she is an arts unit, so she falls right into the easy sort of support by various other really fantastic meta supports that exist out there for arts. So again, I do really like Hokusai's performance, even though her refund numbers could be better, even though her damage probably at this point could use a little bit of a bump up. I still think she's worth it in the current year on JP. So that is the Hakenden banner in a nutshell. All of the banners covered right there, and we are now done with June. So let's go ahead and move into July here. You guys can see we start off with the main interlude Ooku release campaign. Remember, all of this probably going to happen after NA's anniversary, but we are not going to talk about the anniversary until we get to where it is on JP. So that is coming up. But again, just starting off right here, you can see the Ooku release is going to obviously make the Ooku main interlude free. This will be probably, I think, my 6th time doing the event. But needless to say, again, if you've already purchased it at this point, you will have the capacity to get it for free. But I believe this is the first time that it is available for everybody, so you should be fine. The summoning campaign, however, will include our Sakura faces. So, and really a lot of people that were involved in the Ooku event and CCC in that capacity. So, talking about them right off the outset here, you end up with Kama. Kama, still to date, in my opinion, is the gold standard for single target assassins. There is nobody to me that is as cracked as she is. There are a couple of units that are close in terms of what they can do down the stretch, but Kama is just so fluid and so easy to use. So it is why she ends up being my recommendation, plus some of the extra stuff that she has in her kit. To start out with, she has the ability to overcharge her NP by one stage, one time for 3 turns. You can go ahead and use this really early on because her NP's overcharge effect is a multi-turn duration effect, so you don't have to worry about that there. And then the heal helps counteract this, but if you really want to get rid of the demerit, put a cleanse command code on her, and then you won't have to worry about the 1000 HP down, as it'll just kind of very quickly go away. Her second skill is what I like to call unexpiring guts. This does mean that even though it's only on a 6-turn cooldown, that it will never expire unless it actually gets triggered. So you can sit there and have it not get popped for basically the 6-turn cooldown and not have to pop this skill again until it does get popped. That is something to keep in mind, is that it is very strong to that effect. It increases her own attack as well for 3 turns by up to 30%. So again, a lot of Kama skills are use them right away and then put them on cooldown so that you get back to them early, making her really synergistic with herself. Her third skill is a 50% charge skill, which just, I cannot say enough about how useful this is on a single target assassin. So this really helps her out. But then if that weren't enough, it also makes her actually one of the few units that is effective against the alter ego class. It makes her another option in comparison to someone like Hephaestion at actually killing the alter egos. In fact, prior to the Pretender class coming into existence, it was basically only Kama and then later on Musashi that ever really had any capacity to deal with Avengers at a decent level. Obviously, you could take Berserkers or you could try to take Knight classes up against them, but they really did not have any weakness other than those 2 units. So having this is really, really nice. It's, again, gonna basically just make her into an effective class against them. She will take half damage from them, deal 2 times to them. It also is gonna increase her critical damage and then reduce all enemies' charm debuff resistance for 1 turn. So the turn that you pop this skill on, you really want to NP if you can. And the reason why is because, as you can see down here, she has an 80% chance to charm with her NP. Interestingly enough, she has a unique form of the divinity passive that also makes her charm debuff immune herself. Her NP is a 10-hit single target NP that deals damage, has an 80% chance to charm after the effect, and then again has a overcharge effect of quick performance for 3 turns that activates first by 20%. So again, popping that overcharge effect just means that you will have this basically sitting there, and I believe it is a 2 times, if I remember correctly reading right here. No, it's only a 1 time. So you will instead get 25% for 3 turns. And then, you know, if you NP any other time at that point, it's still just going to keep adding 20% and such to it. So there is no harm, no foul in going ahead and using it and getting it out there. But yes, I do believe that Kama is both a fantastic boss killer, alter ego killer, and really just awesome challenge unit. And she can be used to handle single enemy waves in a farm node as well. So I really like Kama and really recommend her for your choice of single target assassin. Then next up here is Kiara Alter Ego. Kiara Alter Ego has not really been in the best place. She's not bad, but we've now seen she got a ton of buffs, and then what ended up happening is basically the Buster system came into being. And that allowed units like Okitan to kind of pass her a little bit in terms of raw power. And then, dear God, we now are dealing with Tiamat on JP that just absolutely trounces a ton of classes and a ton of units at this point. So Kiara is definitely left a little bit behind in that regard. I'm terrified to think of how they would handle her if they wanted to make her rival Tiamat at this point, but it is what it is. Again, I think the biggest issue that I've always had with Kiara actually stems from her NP gen. She does have a really nice NP gen on her third skill, and I have actually criticized Kiara Alter Ego for having too much in her kit. In that regard, she'll remind you quite a bit of Muramasa, where she kind of just does everything. You can see with all of her upgrades, she has the ability to reduce one enemy's debuff resist, reduce their arts resist, charge her gauge by 50%, drain them, reduce their defense for 3 turns, again, remove their buffs now, and then with her third skill here, give herself invincibility, increase her crit damage, increase her NP gen rate, increase her debuff resistance, increase her own healing received, and then deal 3,000 damage to herself, which is the only real demerit there. That being said, the healing received rate is 50%, and when you scroll on down to her NP, you will see that basically with her NP interlude, she heals 5,000 HP. So that 3,000 HP demerit is not an issue, especially since, again, you get the benefit of increasing the heal rate by 50%. So you're healing for 7,500 HP here. It's practically a drop in the bucket at that point. The other big thing to pay attention to is she has a unique passive here that just grants her partial effectiveness against the ruler class. I mean, I get the lore again, but like, yeah, this just feels like, you know, the cherry on top of everything else. Her NP ignores invincibility for 1 turn and ignores defense buffs, which is kind of hilarious because she already had buff removal in her kit. And then again, it recovers HP at the end of it. So to me, the only big issue is basically that her refund actually for a long period in time in the game kind of required you to have multiple MP levels up for her to work, because she really needed overkill hits to make it matter. Since then, they've kind of buffed her her damage output, so she's in a better place. Obviously not compared to Tiamat, but again, she's still pretty good for a AoE alter ego. And again, you can absolutely loop with her now at this point due to the fact that Castoria has come into the game, and there's a lot more charge and, you know, NP gen floating around in comps than we had when she was first released. Next up here, I think we already talked about Shez. We talked about the fact that she's a Black Grail looper. What we didn't get to talk about was Parvati. The Parvati is very much an analog to the Valkyries that we talked about earlier. If the Valkyries just have consistent damage the entire time, Parvati has lower damage for the first 2 turns and then higher damage for the 3rd turn, which, you know, depending on your outlook on things, may be better, so it just really depends. But yes, this is an interesting unit nonetheless. Out of all the quick units that are out there, Parvati actually has really good refund with regards to things, so I don't think that's one of her big issues. Instead, it's going to end up being having enough damage to get the job done, especially at lower NP levels. She's a permanent unit, and again, I do think she is good. She holds up well over time, and that's just due to the design of her kit overall. So you can see she gives quick performance of 3 turns and NP gen of 3 turns, each 30%. Her second skill is attack, defense, critical star generation, and debuff resistance. And the attack is no slouch as it's at 50%. You're just going to want to save it for that 3rd turn if you can. That's where that big spike on the 3rd turn comes from. And then the 3rd skill is a little bit wonky at this point. It basically drains herself to give somebody charge, which the drain is always 10%, but the charge can be up to 20%, so you can use it on herself for net 10% charge if you want. So it is there. It's not the best. It probably could stand to be more at this point, but they probably don't want to break Parvati. And then on top of that, it's also got a heal. The other big thing here is again going to be the fact that she deals damage to all enemies and has a 60% chance to charm them for 1 turn, very similar to Kama in that capacity. Her overcharge effect, though, will charge the party's gauge after the fact by 10%, kind of helping out in the charge situation yet again. Don't expect her to necessarily full refund all the time, but I have seen a Parvati hilariously enough work with a double Castoria comp. So Damage won't be good if you do that, but it's a testament to how decent the refund can be for a quick unit. So again, don't write Parvati off. She's definitely an older unit at this point, but she is very solid still to this day. And again, you guys can see the pairings, comma, with Parvati here, and then Scheherazade with Parvati as well, and then Kiara with Parvati starting way later. So again, dates may change, but just keep in mind that the overall structure of the banner should be intact, especially with regards to the pacing. We do have some interesting Cs here. I'm not going to say they're the best, but Princess Pilgrimage at least is not the worst either. It is split stats, but it does have starting charge of 50%, critical damage of 15%, and quick damage of 15%. So if it were all attack, I would probably be saying a lot nicer things about this CE. Sadly, the devs really seem to hate quick Cs sometimes because for some odd reason, there is an inordinate number of them that happen to have split stats compared to their Buster Arts counterparts. I'm not sure why, but it is what it is. So again, that is your main interlude there. And then we get to the countdown campaign for the 7th anniversary. This is basically the lead up to 7th anniversary. Expect this to happen on an A ahead of our anniversary, so this may be happening instead of in July, sometime in June. So just keep that in the back of your head, that this banner could come sooner than you expect. And boy, is it a banner. I really like it. So again, this is a banner that a lot of people were asking for a long time. It's the return of a lot of rare, older summer units. And boy, is it a good one. Because again, you can see there are separate rate-ups. The problem that you're going to have is rolling the 4 stars. As again, some of them have a unique solo day. Others do not. So keep that in the back of your head that that's going to be not the best situation. Still, we're going to go ahead and talk about each of them. There are some really nice CEs here as well. So let's get digging. Squirtoria. Now, I actually think, is this not where she gets the upgrade? I could have sworn it was here. Oh, maybe it was with the actual anniversary. But either way, Squirtoria has an upgrade coming that I'm going to still say to a point is... Oh, no, actually, I think that's the next year. So we're still a year ahead of this. But it was not the upgrade that Squirtoria actually needed, but it was still a good upgrade. A lot of the times, I think people look at Squirtoria and they acknowledge just how strong she is. That has always been the mantra with her. I don't think anybody, other than one time, at one point in history in FGO, I think she has always been perceived as strong. And the one time was right after, early on in FGO's history, where Orion got a buff. There were some really, and I'm not going to say everyone, but there were some really weird people that, for some odd reason, seemed to really think that Orion was just flat out better than Squirtoria. I still don't understand those people to this day. Regardless, I have used Squirtoria so much across both my accounts that I can really speak to the virtues of how good she is. She is the unit that has the highest NP gain after her NP in the entire game. This is kind of cheating because she has charge that enables that, but her NP gain is incredibly solid. She's one of the only units in the game, alongside Surfmo, one of the other highest refunders in the game, to have her NP gain tweaked. And you can actually see that if you come on down to the trivia over here on Fandom. They actually do talk about this, that her NP generation rate was increased from 0.5 to 0.59 originally back in 2016 on JP. So again, I think she came out, people found her a little bit undertuned, and the devs decided to tweak it. Still, her NP gen rate has been absolutely phenomenal, and that was not that big of a change, so it still clearly couldn't have been that bad even at the time. It's just back then we didn't have nearly as good of supports. So, what makes Squirtoria so strong? Interestingly enough, she does not have a triple arts deck. She does have double quick though, and it is 4-hit, and well, it's still really good at NP gain as well as star generation. So her first skill is 3 turns of arts performance and party defense, basically, allowing her to just have some really good loopable capability here. The upgrade though gives her ignore evasion for 3 turns, so just some nice extra sure hit there. And then 30% charge to the best refunder in the game. I'll take it, but she absolutely didn't need it. So this does allow her to be used in a couple extra situations. Now I've used her in like situations where I have a 50% starting charge C to take out a single enemy wave every now and then, because I have a strong one on JP. But for years on both NA and JP, I was rolling around with a low NP level of Squirtoria, and let me tell you how much that does not matter. It does matter for talking NP1, but only in a small instance. And regardless, the power of Squirtoria, it kind of lies elsewhere. And that one instance actually is the second skill. If you only have NP1 of Squirtoria, your charge can only go up to 100%. That is to say, without a second NP level, you can't go over 100%. This is the issue here, is if you ever want to use her heal, this kind of means you have to be a little bit more selective with it. The 10% drain could cost you your NP. And before anyone thinks about it, you know how 99% always rounds up to 100%? That is true, with one exception. One exception is when you're at 109% and you drain yourself down by 10%. So if you're ever over 100%, you drain yourself back to 99%, it will not round up. So be very careful with that. Do not brick yourself. But again, the nice part about having NP2 is that Squirtoria's refund is so high that it's very easy for her to get to like 110% or something after an NP, making it really easy for her to just use this skill with impunity whenever you want. So that's the one instance where I can say, yeah, having NP2 of her would be really good. But obviously the damage is going to get better with NP2, but you do not have to have NP2 otherwise. And you'll still find times where you're able to use this skill, particularly where you go like, okay, I'm not going to get to my NP this turn, but I will get to it to the next turn because I've been card counting and I know. So I'm okay to go ahead and use the heal this turn. Again, it's also on a 4-turn cooldown, making it super low for a 5,000 HP heal. So yes, it has a nasty demerit, but pretty easy for the unit that has the most refund in the game. Again, her third skill here is going to have party attack up and then increase the critical star generation rate of male allies for 3 turns. Still, back in the day, we'd have been having like Waver and such supporting her, and that would have been a lot more viable. Nowadays, a lot of the time, it's going to be Castoria, and Castoria really takes the unit that's the best refunder in the game and makes her even more refundable. It pretty much automates the refund at that point. So yeah, it's really nice for her, regardless of the fact that you may not be getting the effects of this the secondary effects of that third skill. She does have territory creation to kind of help her arts up even more. And then we get to what really makes Squirtoria strong. So the fact that she can loop and just keep looping over and over and over again. I believe my record is 16 NPs in a row with her. Crap, I probably could have gone longer, but the fight ended before that point. She's got a 10-hit single target arts NP. That's part of the reason why right there. And then if that weren't enough, she refunds basically 20% automatically. So yeah, that's why. She deals damage to one enemy, and then she has a 70% chance to reduce their NP gauge by 1. This is the difficult part about using Squirtoria. You're never quite sure if that that drain is going to land. And sometimes you kind of sit there and you look at the enemy and you go like, do I NP this turn or do I sit on it? Because maybe I just want to pop my survival skills and force the enemy to NP this turn while I have them. or I could take the risk and not pop them and try to drain and see what happens. You can always potentially use the NP, see if it drains, and if it doesn't, then reset and do it. The problem is the act of resetting and then popping your skills will change the seed and might make the NP drain then. So you have to be a little bit careful, just be deliberate in whatever you choose to do. But this is a problem with her that, again, if you're up against a unit being right about to NP and you need to pop survival skills that are only a single turn duration, you have this, you know, it's like the meme of the guy sweating with the two buttons in front of him. You have this dilemma of which one to press. So sometimes you just gotta try. But again, she's really good, and she can absolutely deprive an enemy of even getting to an NP if you can loop her fast enough and hard enough, especially if you get lucky on the procs. So I have decimated units with Squirtoria and just basically made it so that they just never, ever, ever got to do anything that they wanted to me. That is what makes her so strong. Now, with regards to Squirtoria, I've talked about this with regards to really all of our single target, especially amongst the SSR archers. Of them, only Orion has had an NP interlude. The other ones kind of could use it, especially due to some of the competition that is present from AoE archers, from the MHX series of units, and really even other berserkers that are out there as such. The single target archers are just kind of falling behind in damage capacity. This is why I've said I would actually like to see Squirtoria get something like an NP interlude. I'm not asking for like some crazy, you know, tweaks to her kit or anything like that. She is already incredibly strong in that capacity. For Squirtoria, it's not so much about the damage that makes her useful. That being said, we do have units that have automatic drain that do way more damage than her and can kind of be brute force looped. So yeah, I think it's kind of time that we just revisit a lot of our single target archers and say, do they need an NP interlude? And I know a lot of people seem to be against these ideas. I'm not really sure why. We're playing a game in which Melisande, Tiamat, Kukulkan, you name it, they all exist and they deal crazy butt tons of damage that in a lot of ways out damages the single target enemies, even though they're AoE. So yeah, I think it's time. I think it's time to kind of go through and upgrade a lot of these units and kind of get them on par with some of these units that are absolutely new meta power crept units and level the playing field a lot more. So again, that's my take on it. You don't have to agree with it, but that is kind of my experience. And I'm not just championing for Squirtoria to get stronger. I want more than just her to get stronger. Okay, next up, we end up with Kiyohime Lancer. God, Kyo. So Kyo has been super rare as far as units go. She went almost 4 years, I think, without a banner. So you're probably going to want to try to roll for her at certain points if you have the opportunity. That being said, Kyo has always kind of lacked identity. Obviously, if you like Kyo, you're going to roll for her, but this unit did not stand out really in any significant way. She was very, very middling. So the devs came back in and they actually gave her a buff to this first skill that gives her 20% charge, definitely helping her to be used a little bit more. I'm disappointed that it's only 20%. I think 30% would have been completely justified, but hey, it is what it is. And it now increases the amount of damage that is done with fire and gives it a burn effect. So it is a decent upgrade, but it's maybe not the best of upgrades. Her second skill is bust her performance for 3 turns. That's always been decent. And her third skill is the ability to reduce one enemy's defense for 3 turns, but also increase their attack by 20%. So make sure you kill them when you use this. Again, her NP deals damage to one enemy and has a 150% chance to seal their skills, and it can inflict burn as well, hence the spread fire status upgrade to that first skill. But yeah, I feel like Kyo's damage is decent, but it's nothing to write home about, and at the end of the day, she's rare and hard to get your hands on, so there's really not a whole lot of reasons to specifically use Kyo. I wouldn't be surprised at some point if they did come back and give her an NP interlude, but that would require them to care about some of the older units again. So, is what it is. Surfmo, mi amor. So Surf Mo is another fantastic looper, as we already talked about. I said earlier in the Squirtoria part that she is one of the other units that has had her NP gain tweaked upwards. She's just incredibly strong. She has been the sort of gold standard for AoE loopers for a long time. Now we have units like Habitrot that have 80% charge and don't care how much refund they do. But Surf Mo has always been that really fluid over and over and over again type of unit. She was used in the past, even in the weird wonky CCC nodes where you had actually two like sets of enemies in one wave. Sorry, in two waves really in one battle, each like wave of the battle. So like you ended up with basically 6 turn nodes that Surf Mo could loop all 6 turns. And she was one of the only units that could do stuff like that at the time, and that kind of proved her worth and how strong just having a lot of NP generation can be. Obviously, the issue in which Surf Mo suffers from is damage, and I think a little bit they're afraid to give Surf Mo any upgrade because of that, because she is in relative parity with a lot of the other AoE riders at this point, at least that are arts, but I don't know, at some point they're going to start upgrading probably some of them, so at some point they probably need to start upgrading all of them. Again, I don't think it's a huge problem. You've got Tiamat that exists and is going to deal way more damage than her and be brute forceable into a 3-turn with a Black Grail, so yeah, that's kind of my justification for buffing all of these units. Just give them all upgrades, move them closer to the line, and let's see where they all shake out, and I think that'd be better, but still. I do want Surf Mo to get an NP interlude in the same capacity, but yeah, she definitely doesn't need any upgrades to her kit. It is just a very simple, very effective kit. 3 turns of arts up, a hard survivability skill, and guts with 30% charge. That's it. That's all you need to be good, especially when you got these kind of refund numbers. She's a 5-hit AoE NP, deals damage to all enemies, and has a chance to reduce their charge by 1. Can't tell you how many times that saved me in a Saberface run. The random 50% chance to drain an enemy. Definitely helped bail me out, but please do not rely on it. It's more of a battle of, numbers and just trying to repeatedly NP against the enemy and hope that you land a drain at some point. But yeah, again, Surf Mo is absolutely fantastic if you want a refunder. You don't have to go for her here. I believe she does have another banner in the next year that is a solo rate up, but definitely go look that up. I'm not entirely sure on that one. But again, she is a fantastic unit and has always been one. So if you guys want to go after her, feel free to. Just remember that you do have other potentially free options available to you, especially now with Nemo Rider out. Then we get to Ruler Martha. Ruler Martha is another interesting one. We talked about Estrella earlier and just how strong Estrella can be. She's got a very synergistic kit. She's anti-evil. Martha is sort of the also-ran at this point. Martha is known for her Buster deck, her gorilla type damage, where she's just going to keep punching and hit someone really hard. She has a 30% charge skill and deals more damage on the water side field. In fact, that is what I want to see them do for her. Make Martha have the ability to change the field to water. That would be really nice for her. Again, have them basically take a look at some of her other skills, but basically she does grant debuff immunity one time and a nice heal. Not a hard survival skill, but it is something. Sadly, Jacob Limbs is anti-divinity and undead. Anti-demon is not demonic, so keep that in mind. Demon is a much more, narrow niche, and as a result, she definitely suffers from that being useful, but there are the occasional times where demon does come into play, and damn, she can hit them hard. So still anti-divine, anti-undead, definitely useful with those, so definitely a nice skill to have there. Her NP has had its interlude. This did help her pull her even with Estrella, but then Estrella got an NP interlude, and well, everything just kind of went to hell and back. Again, she deals damage with her NP and has a 500% chance to reduce their defense beforehand by 20%, which is really what allows her to combo into that, NP into double buster cards for a triple buster brave chain, and she will just absolutely hit hard. I do think at this point, she does need some more upgrades to help keep pace, but yeah, I think at this point it's It's just do they want to go back and actually buff some of the older units? Otherwise, I do think she's still pretty serviceable, pretty quality. So Maid Alter, I think it's a bad rap from a lot of people, mostly because a lot of people don't actually realize how to use her. I've seen a lot of like weird shit thrown her way, but Maid Alter has always had phenomenal damage. She is no longer top dog on the damage meter. She has been supplanted by Ozymandias. But she can pass Ozzy if you do manage to set her up for a reloaded meme. If you don't know what a reloaded meme is, it's the ability for her to get back to her third skill twice with the same NP. So the issue with this third skill is it's only one quick attack by 30% for 3 turns. But it's also only on a 3-turn cooldown. So you pop it early, then you pop her coaching ability that has had its upgrade. That, again, basically the upgrade here, I've seen a lot of people say this is a worthless upgrade. Those people have clearly never used Maid Alter in a challenge environment, because I have many a time. And let me tell you, 1000 damage demerit just sucks when she doesn't have any survivability. So what this did is this allowed her to basically heal herself after the fact with a delay. So really a nice upgrade to kind of offset that stupid demerit that was here. Still not necessarily the upgrade she needed, and that's why people call it bad, but it is a good upgrade nonetheless. But again, the entire point of the skill really is to actually reduce Maid Alter's own cooldowns by 1, but it is targetable, so you could put it on someone else. And so as a result, this would get the cooldown of the skill down to 2 turns, meaning as long as you don't touch a quick card in the first 2 turns, you will have double stacked the skill for a nice 60% steroid for your NP. Again, you do also have the first skill here that gives attack up and party quick performance by 20%. So definitely pretty decent there. But again, that's where you're going to get a lot of firepower from her from. Her NP is a 6-hit single target NP, deals damage to one enemy, and then charges her own NP gauge by 10% after that goes out. So sadly, it's not attached to her overcharge. I think it would be better if it were, but again, we'll see. Maybe one day they'll give her an NP interlude and decide to adjust that. That is, I think, the real issue with Maid Alter. It's not how much damage she deals. That is solid. It's basically being able to get back to another NP, which is a lot easier than people realize due to this 10% charge and due to the fact that her card performance is actually not bad. She's got 4 cards by which to do it, and they each have 3 hit counts. So yeah, if you have quick buffs rolling and stuff, it's really not that bad to get back to an NP with like a quick card and an arts card if they both crit or something like that. I've had it happen numerous times before. That's why I think a lot of people sell her short. But yeah, if you don't have the ability to card or something and you just maybe don't have any charge, as a result, yes, this can be difficult to manage to get multiple NPs out of her with. So again, I do think her performance does sort of allow her to get out from that problem quite a bit. But yeah, it is a problem that she does have. So again, I do really like Maid Alter. I think she hits very hard, and I think she can be a good option for you. I don't know if I'm doing any good job of convincing you. But regardless, again, I'm a Saberface fan, so you know I'm going to sell her hard. Still, just being completely like neutral here, like I said, her damage is very good. Nitocris Assassin is next up. She's another really rare unit, and I love Nitocris Assassin, but I wish she were better. She has design issues. She's actually meant as an AoE assassin tank. And you can see that when you see that her first skill increases her own defense by 30% for 3 turns, further increases the defense by 30% for 1 turn, and then the second skill has a damage cut of 3 attacks 5 turns by 2000. It's also a taunt, so again, this allows her to soak stuff to her, but unlike her caster counterpart, she doesn't have the charge really to help her out. She increases her own attack for 3 turns with her third skill by 30%, her NP damage for 3 turns by 20%, and then her NP gen by 30% for 3 turns, none of which is bad. The issue at play is that she has a 3-hit AoE NP that doesn't generate that much charge, and she is actually screwed by the fact that her instant kill goes out before damage. which would mean that her damage never hits the target and she never generates any Noble Phantasm from an enemy that she death procs. That is the change that I would like to see them make. Either give her a brute force charge or allow her to gain charge if she instant kills an enemy. Enough that it would kind of take the place of an enemy not being there. Like the amount that she would have gotten had she managed to hit it. So I don't know if that's something like 30% or something like that, but I feel like that would at least be fair, and then she wouldn't feel so penalized for having it. Or, heaven forbid, they just do an NP interlude and they switch this to activating after damage, which hilariously enough would just be better. At the end of the day, she definitely could use an upgrade. Her damage is not good, so she really needs to be looked at by the devs because it's a shame. She is a very fun, very fantastic unit, but yeah, she is absolutely the epitome of an old summer unit that has been completely left behind and disregarded. Next up, we have Jarcher here, and Jarcher is another fantastic option for people. We do have options that have come out more recently, like Zenobia, who's a 4-star who's permanent. You also end up having Durga, who has come out more recently on JP. So again, there are competitors now in this capacity. But the one thing that Jarcher does really well, just like Surfmo and Squirtoria before her, is refund. She just absolutely is completely fluid in the amount that she refunds. She was basically one of our first Black Grail loopers in the game. She was able to loop with just double Nero Bride originally, and it really worked out quite well for her. So she does not require double Castoria to be able to loop, and that is how good her refund is. In fact, we can say the same thing about Surfmo. You can pretty much loop with her with just one Castoria, and it's quite hilarious. But this does mean that she's actually quite capable of getting away with handling non-3 set waves of enemies. So a 2 enemy wave or a 1 enemy wave, she can potentially still loop over. In fact, that is probably the way in which she's better than Zenobia, is because while Zenobia is permanent and kind of maybe able to get higher quality or higher copies of, you could have that issue where her 20% charge per turn kind of just locks her in. Whereas Jarcher just has high refund and has a 40% charge to be able to use on demand. So again, you can move this around and use it as you will. It also does end up giving NP damage up and crit on waterside battlefields. She has 3 turns of arts up with 2 hits of invincibility for 3 turns, making her at least somewhat sustainable. And again, her 3rd skill here is a party-wide attack and an increase to allies with good alignments, which you can see there are plenty of options here to choose from, including definitely some interesting supports that could potentially work well with her. So that is something to keep in the back of your mind, that yes, there are other potential options here, including Astoria. So definitely some ability to either buff another unit that would be dealing damage or buff your supports so that they can help damage alongside you. And that, in that regard, that is definitely an excellent skill. Her NP is a 4-hit AoE NP that deals damage to all enemies and gains critical stars every turn for 3 turns by 10. This effect does stack, so if you're looping her, you're going to keep getting more and more and more and more stars per turn. Which is why she also can just kind of manufacture crits by the 3rd turn. It's very, very useful to have this. Interestingly enough, Zenobia has stars per turn in her kit and then crit damage from her overcharge effect, so they kind of flip-flop in that regard. But still, I do think Jarcher is still a really good unit and definitely worthy of consideration in today's day and age. Even if you maybe have your eyes set on one of the other options, she will be available right here. But again, you don't have to have her, and you can go with one of the other options if you prefer them.